Chapter 71. This isn't fair. Whitney cried out as she glared at me. I won. I reminded her, and that only made her angrier. Her face went red as she glared at me. You shouldn't have. My milk tank can't lose to some. She trailed off waving at me, and then she stomped off, whipping around and marching away. My badge? I called after her, but she was gone, stomping to her gym building and entering with a loud slam of the door. Is Whitney okay? Bugsy asked, and I looked at him incredulously. Her? I'm the one that should be getting a badge. Hey, come back. I demanded, running to the gym, but the door was locked, and after a minute of banging, she didn't come back out. I think she'll come out. Eventually? Bugsy tried to offer, but I glared and huffed and just pulled up my goggles and shrugged. Forget it. I'm taking Lucario to the Pokemon Center. I grumbled and stomped off. I'd have to talk to someone else if Whitney really was going to refuse to give me the star badge. Grumbling all the way about prissy farm girls, I stomped into the Pokemon Center and felt something relax as Nurse Joy greeted me. Kanto or Johto, it hardly mattered. Nurse Joy was always there. Passing over my Pokemon, I flopped on the couch of the Pokemon Center and considered the battle. Sleep Talk was a good move to combo with Rest, but you had no control of what move your Pokemon did. For Whitney to have her Miltank use Rollout. Was it chance she had gotten it and won, or training? I think training. There was no hesitation or surprise or delight on her face as the sleep rollout had started. She knew it would happen. That's really impressive. Too bad she was also a massive butt. I shook it off, no point in getting angry. I'd complain about it later or something. I looked at Bugsy, who was looking a little antsy. Heh. Antsy. You okay? Yeah. I'm fine. I'll be back, okay? He said and rose up, and I watched as he stomped off. I guess the kid had a bit of spine to him after all. And that's why Lance is actually a flying-type trainer, pretending to be a dragon master. I whispered to the group of children. Once my team was returned to me, I headed out back to check out the battling area, and ended up impressing everyone with Dragonite. So they had instantly assumed I was a member of the Blackthorn clan, and so I had made sure to use that assumption to spread the truth. But Lance is a dragon master. That's why he's so cool. And where's the cape? A cape that flaps in the breeze. Like a flying-type master. I denied instantly as I crouched among the small group of boys. Think of Faulkner. He has his flowy kimono, right? It's the same thing. To test the wind. But Lance is so cool. Yeah. He isn't some lame flying-type master. Another called out. Then explain how all of his Pokemon are flying-type? I asked and stumped the kids. Which instantly got a reaction, as many young kids don't like being proven wrong. They started raging. You're wrong. Stupid. No. You're stupid. I argued back, and the boy that said it glared and reached for a Pokeball before looking over at Dragonite and slumping. Yeah, sorry kid, staking it on a Pokemon battle isn't going to work against me. Wahahaha. Vicky? Oh? Bugsy, welcome BAO, it's you. I grumbled as I rose up. Bugsy was walking over with a blank-faced Whitney. That's right. She said as she sped up, walking past Bugsy without issue, her longer legs putting in work. Then she stopped in front of me and breathed in and out. Congratulations on your victory. You defeated me, and earned this. She said then, and held out a plain badge. One that I didn't take. She looked at me, and I looked at her. I defeated your strongest team. I reminded her, and she winced, her hand closing on the plain badge a moment before putting it in her pocket and pulling out another. This one had the star. You earned this. She said, struggling to get the words out. Gently, I took the badge. Looking it over. A fine addition to my collection, I decided. I pulled off my pack and pulled out my badge case and placed it inside. Then I looked at her. She was struggling to control her emotions, but I was going to be the bigger person. You have an amazing Pokemon in your Miltank. That Sleep Talk combo was crazy. I can't imagine the amount of training with rest and sleep talk it took to get a Pokemon to always choose a specific move. A long time. She answered and I nodded, as she did as well. Then she turned away. Bugsy remained watching her go with a look on his face that I've seen on plenty of boys before. Thank you, Bugsy. I answered then, and he jerked a bit at the sound of my voice. Oh, it's no problem. I can't have anyone thinking the Johto gym leaders aren't good honorable people. He demurred, looking a little embarrassed. I know. Whitney was just surprised. I never thought I wouldn't end up getting my badge. Good. Yeah, he trailed off watching Whitney, and I smiled a bit. At least she'll remember who you are now. Yeah. He whispered a bit breathily before freezing up and turning to look at me, and my evil smirk. Bugsy and Whitney, I started, and the kids who had been watching in awe as I got a badge instantly jumped in, like all tiny terrors would. Sitting in a tree. K.I.S. I'm not. Bugsy yelled, interrupting them, and they burst into a sprint, running away giggling as Bugsy chased them for a minute. Heh. There it is. I shouted over the wind, happy at the sight of Cyanwood City, coming up out of the waves. We hadn't gotten lost, but Dragonite and I did have to follow the direction a ship was coming from, to get the right angle. And there it was. Great! Bugsy called out. We hadn't been riding on Dragonite for long, but I think the wonder of it had mostly run out by now, and the ocean crossing a massive bay didn't really feel very entertaining. As we came in for a landing on the beach, I made sure to keep an eye out over the town. Chuck, the gym leader, was a fighting-type specialist, and he had a dojo-style gym. There were a few buildings I could see that were likely the right one, but more importantly, I spotted the Pokemon Center. We landed with a soft puff of air as Dragonite flapped her wings to stop her momentum, and soon Bugsy and I were on the sand, stretching out and happy to have feet on the ground again. It hadn't been a long flight, but it was still a flight. Wow. We just crossed the entire bay in what, an hour? Bugsy asked, and I shrugged. Something like that, but it was mostly because Dragonite didn't know exactly where the city was. So we went a bit slower so we didn't miss it. Dragonite is so amazing. Bugsy said, and of course my girl preened at the words, tilting her head back and huffing happily. Yeah, she's amazing. You ready for a rest? I asked her and she nodded, but then she slapped a hand on her bicep at the same time while giving me a confident look. Ah, still ready for a battle? Well, don't worry, I'll be putting my faith in your punch power for this battle if I call you. Drag. She chirped happily at the idea, and disappeared into the Pokeball a moment later. Ah. The beach here is pretty nice, I mentioned, as I looked around. Cyanwood had a pretty heavy-duty concrete barrier against the ocean, but the beach was both delightfully empty, not full of tourists like Cinnabar, and it was just miles of golden sand. Yeah, it is nice. Most people just go to Goldenrod, it's famous for its beaches, but I guess Cyanwood is pretty nice too. Too bad it's too cold to really enjoy. Bugsy mentioned, and I nodded, shivering a bit myself. Winter wasn't just coming, winter was here. Hey! Don't go in the water. A voice called from up above them. I looked up and saw an older woman waving at us frantically. I shrugged and headed up the concrete steps. Hello. I greeted her, and she sighed. Good. It's tentacle breeding season right now. The beach is closed down to keep anyone from getting hurt. She explained, and I just nodded. Jellyfish swarm, gotcha. Oh. Bugsy whispered, sounding startled as he heard the news though. That could have been bad. He muttered as he stared back over the water. I'm not that worried, I said, and then at the woman's glare I raised my hands. Not that I'm planning on testing it. Geez. I whispered as she stopped glaring. Tentacle don't usually come out to the beach, and it's not like I was going to jump in. Now. I saw you two come in on that Dragonite. Is there something you two need in Cyanwood? We don't do tourists much, she asked, and I grinned brightly. First the Pokemon Center, and then we are here to visit the gym. I'm challenging Chuck. Ah, trainers. A bit late, aren't you? I have a Dragonite, distance is irrelevant. I answered back, and that earned me a guffaw from the older women. You're an interesting one, aren't you, Blackthorn? Alright, Pokemon Center is down there, and Chuck's gym is just a bit beyond it. She confirmed, and then turned away, heading back to a little cafe on the side of the street above the beach, before I could deny being a Blackthorn. That was kinda annoying, but at least in the future, no one would make that mistake again once I blew up the conference. Pokemon Center. I called out, hand raised, and Bugsy sighed as he chased after me. I spent a few hours relaxing in the Pokemon Center, giving Dragonite time to cool down from her flight, and Lucario more time to rest after her battle. But then it was time. Thank you, Nurse Joy. I love you. I called out happily as I left the Pokemon Center, to the amused giggles of the pink-haired nurse. Cyanwood Nurse Joy was super nice. After hearing I was going to fight Chuck, she had checked over my team and even worked with Dragonite a bit, to make sure her wings were ready for a battle after a flight. This'll be your 5th badge. Bugsy mentioned casually as I stalked forward. I slowed a bit and met his eyes. Yep. What's up? It's just. You've already gathered 5 badges. Star badges. You're a really strong trainer. He added, and when I just waited for him to actually say something, he finally got it out. I want to fight you again. He said, and I blinked at his admittance. I've been watching you battle. And I want to battle you again. I won't. I won't lose next time. I looked him over, at his confidence, and smirked. After I beat Claire. I'll look forward to it. I told him and got a nod in turn. Another battle against Bugsy? Sounds fun. But then we were there. The gym. I grinned as it had a bell out front, along with a sigh. Challengers should ring the bell to announce themselves. I rang it instantly. It rang soft and gentle. A nice noise. Wahahaha. A voice shot out from inside and Bugsy jumped, but my smile just grew as Chuck came stomping out the entrance of the house beside the gym. Who has come to challenge me? He shouted rambunctiously, and I raised my hand. I'm your challenger today. Victoria Ferrous. I am Chuck of the Cyanwood City Gym. I accept. Yes. Finally, a gym leader that just was there to battle without any other nonsense. Chuck. I want to fight your strongest team. Hold nothing back. Ha ha ha. You wish to challenge my strongest team? Are you sure? I will blow you away with martial training and pure muscle. He roared out, but I couldn't help but look down at his gut. That was a bit big. I do. I shouted out, deciding to keep the energy instead of calling him out. Very well. He roared and raced back into the gym, and I rushed to follow him without a word. Our eyes had met. A battle was inevitable after all. We raced into a large dojo-like battle arena, and I was getting excited, but then Chuck suddenly yelled out, "Honey! Where are my Pokeballs?" And I slumped as I realized the man had completely lost his own team. After a long search, Chuck had realized his main team's Pokeballs were at the Pokemon Center for a checkup, and while we waited, Chuck's wife fed Bugsy and I dinner. And it was a lot of food, but that woman could cook. Finally, afterwards, the Pokemon had arrived as Nurse Joy had given Chuck a look for calling and asking her to deliver them. Yikes. And then we battled. Lucario. She shouted as Chuck's Machamp charged in. Machamp. The Pokemon roared as the two fighting types tore into each other. While Machamp tore into the area with overwhelming power, Lucario and I were using a different method. Keep it up. Detect through. I called out, as Lucario was using the move to see what would come next and dodge around. Pin her down, Machamp. Chuck roared and Lucario struggled. Type weakness to fighting, against a truly powerful fighting type, made things a bit hard on her. Now. I called, and Lucario switched from detect. Just as she was struck by a painful Mach punch, she shifted, and then spun with the attack. Her foot coming out and smashing into Machamp's chin with so much force, the much larger Pokemon was lifted straight off the floor. See counter. Chuck roared out in shock and then delight, laughing happily as Lucario completed her spin and landed, and then fell to one knee. Chuck and I both watched, but Machamp was out, and his shoulders slumped a small amount. Amazing. Using detect first? I see. I understand. You used it until you were sure you were taking a hit that Lucario would still be standing after, and was strong enough to knock out Machamp? That's right. Lucario actually has a type weakness to fighting moves, because of her steel type. So if she was going to win, it had to be decisive. Wahahaha. Such spirit. Excellent. Planning out a battle before it begins is an excellent start. But you haven't defeated me yet, and your Lucario cannot do the same move again. I hope you are ready. I laughed as the man shouted out. He was definitely full of energy, but I hadn't really planned it specifically. I looked at Lucario, and she looked at me. She nodded, and I raised the Pokeball to return her. It had actually been her idea. Lucario knew how to fight after all. I was just polishing her up and strengthening her up. That and teaching her to fight Pokemon battles, and not just feral fighting. But I placed her back on my belt and reached for another Pokemon. The last Pokemon I think I would be using in today's match. Sorry, Chuck. But you are the perfect fight to let my next Pokemon really stretch her legs. So this match? It's already over. I said, playing the heel a bit to the man, which he delighted in, flexing his chest and raising his arms. Then you will be surprised at the power of fighting Pokemon. Then I tossed a Pokeball, and a goddess descended. Afterwards it was quiet. Even Bugsy was too shocked to call the match. Chansey was standing there unharmed in a now destroyed arena, bouncing lightly on her toes and looking as usual like she was just happy to be there. Chansey heals OP, please don't nerf. Before her lay her last foe. The poor Poliwrath was completely flat-faced into the ground before the power of the goddess. That's? Chuck whispered, having progressively lost his energy as the battle continued, shock replacing it. Chansey! I love you! I shouted out, as I charged and jumped into a big hug. I guess I was feeling affectionate today. Chansey swung me around and we both giggled as we hugged tight. What was that? Bugsy finally let loose, unable to stop himself, and I turned and smirked at him. Chansey is strong, I decided, and Chansey perked up, standing up straight. She nodded her head in agreement beside me. Chuck suddenly took a step forward and then another as he approached, and Chansey and I looked as he fell to his knees and grabbed Chansey's flipper. Amazing! You're perfect! The man started crying, and I blinked before smiling proudly as I made out perfect physique. And a goddess. In there. So Chuck had seen it too. Chansey was truly a goddess descended upon us mere mortals, to achieve peak gains. And there. He confirmed, handing off the storm badge, with star. With this, you have proof that you have defeated me. Chuck of Cyanwood City. The storm badge is proof of your accomplishment, and of your excellent training. I vow to train 24 hours a day to reach Nirvana. A goddess has shown the way. He cheered out, and I laughed in delight at his excitement. Chansey chance. Chansey spoke, waving a flipper at him in embarrassment. But I was glad I had chosen to give Chansey a chance to stretch her legs here. For one, Chuck understood. For another? I glanced at Chansey, and our eyes met. Understanding passed, and I grinned in delight as she looked equally happy. She had really enjoyed this. A battle. A workout for her, but more importantly, she had gone through 5 additional Pokemon. This was the longest amount of time she had spent battling outside training with the team. For once, Chansey was the absolute victor of this match, and she had definitely enjoyed it. She truly had found her battling spirit working with Koga, and our bond had grown ever stronger. Chance? She asked, pointing, and I nodded, offering the badge to her, which she took and looked it over. I noticed she smiled brighter, happier as she looked down on the badge, no doubt seeing her own face reflected in the star. We did it, I said, smiling as Chansey looked up from the badge to me. She nodded slowly, but her spreading smile told me the truth. She reached out and grabbed me, and I laughed in delight as she spun me around while hugging me tight. I hugged her back, and we both laughed in delight. We did it, Chansey. We won the badge. I called out, cheering, and then there was something more. A flash, a connection, and I blinked back the white light as I felt the flippers holding me grow and change. I gasped as I looked up in the same gentle eyes. As she looked down on me. Blissey! Blissey! We shouted together and instantly started moving. Dancing around in delight, my hands in her flippers as we cheered and celebrated. A note from Seras. And so the goddess ascends. Gitsy will restart tomorrow at the normal time. Chapter 72. Hee hee hee. I continued to giggle as Blissey was being silly and carrying me around like I was a stray cat as she sauntered out of the gym without looking back, and then marching to the Pokemon Center. Wait up. Bugsy called out, but Blissey didn't wait up, and instead, continued on, practically skipping down the street and entering the Pokemon Center with a triumphant stride. I wasn't sure what Blissey was doing, but I was totally there for it, because for a moment. Yeah. Friendship evolution was really cool, and there was something that had sparked between us. It was more than just a happy feeling. It was something real. We were friends. Blissey and I. More than just people working together, or her chasing after a weird kid and making sure her Pokemon were healthy. Blissey. Blissey thought of me as a friend. I giggled some more at the thought and then Blissey stopped. Bliss. Blissey. She cried out to the mostly empty Pokemon Center. But the Chansey and Nurse Joy that worked here both jerked as if scolded, and suddenly Blissey was surrounded by pink. Oh my. Look at you. Nurse Joy cried out, and Chansey was cheering as well, literally pulling out little paper fans from somewhere, and she was dancing and cheering Blissey on like she had just finished first in a race. It was super cute, especially as I looked up I could see Blissey smile bright and happy. Congratulations. Nurse Joy offered first to Blissey, grabbing her fin and shaking it happily, and then leaning down to grab my hand. Thanks. I said, and Nurse Joy smiled at my obvious happiness. What's the big deal? Bugsy finally asked as he had reached the entrance in time to see all of this and was breathing heavily. I mean, I've never heard of a Blissey before, but... Is it that weird? Oh my, yes. Nurse Joy broke in before I could say anything. The exact mechanics between evolving into a Blissey aren't truly understood. Every Blissey is a wonderful addition to the world. They spread happiness and healing wherever they go. Nurse Joy gushed and I giggled as I noticed Blissey getting a little embarrassed by the all words. Blissey is a friendship evolution. I added instantly to Nurse Joy with a big smile. All you have to do is be Chansey's friend and battle together until your bond grows big and strong, and then boom. Blissey is here. I cheered out and Blissey giggled and patted me on the head, but I realized a moment later, Blissey action wasn't an agreement but the same emotion Nurse Joy gave me. A sort of affectionate disbelief. I looked up and realized Blissey was the same. She didn't quite understand either. Friendship evolution is a thing. I called, waving my arms around, but Nurse Joy just giggled and joined Blissey in patting my head. Making friends with your Pokemon is very important. Nurse Joy offered, but it wasn't really genuine. I slumped. Fine, I'll just have to prove it. Considering it was getting late, Bugsy and I jumped once more onto Dragonite's back and flew back across the ocean to the mainland. Olivine City was really easy to find as we just followed the boats and ships that were either heading out or rushing back to the city as the sun drooped low. That and the large lighthouse that flared bright light into the sea, letting us home in on it. Flying over the port city for a bit, we spotted the Pokemon Center and landed. Everything was going normally, until we actually entered the Pokemon Center, when suddenly Nurse Joy pounced on me. Chansey and Nurse Joy both hit party poppers, showering Bugsy and I in confetti. Congratulations! Chansey! They both cheered and I blinked, having been a little startled. Wah! Another Blissey has come into the world. How wonderful! Nurse Joy spoke, hands folded in front of her face and stars practically in her eyes. Can you let her out? Ah, sure. I offered, confused, and did so. Blissey. She greeted the world and then blinked at the new set of Nurse Joy and Chansey that were both staring at her with sparkly eyes. It's true. Our sister was telling the truth. I laughed at the attention Blissey was getting, making her be a little embarrassed. It seems a Blissey appearing was a big deal, and Nurse Joy back in Cyanwood had put out the word to all of her sisters. Nurse Joy explained as we were all bunched up on a couch as she offered us some fancy tea, that was definitely not something normally offered to Pokemon Center trainers. Bugsy and I were both quietly sipping at the treat as Nurse Joy's Chansey chattered away at Blissey, acting almost starstruck. It was strange. I get that Chansey themselves aren't the most common right now. And Blissey isn't an easy evolution to get in a world where they aren't common battlers, and on top of that, the idea of friendship causing Pokemon to evolve not being understood or accepted. I watched as Blissey flexed and the corded muscle stretched under her skin, and yep, Blissey was still buff. Maybe even more buff. The Chansey looked shocked, and I think there was a bit of envy too. I was just finishing the tea when I realized Blissey would be stronger now than she was before. Would her gravity be stronger too? I shuddered a bit. At least Arcanine would be happy. The next morning bright and early, I walked over to the Olivine City gym. Thankfully, like Chuck Jasmine, the Steel-type gym leader was still actually holding matches at her gym, despite it being so close to the end of the cycle. Walking inside the fancy, almost high-tech gym, I walked up to the secretary at the front, Bugsy following behind me. "I'd like to challenge Jasmine." I greeted smiling, and the secretary gave me a smile that told me that wasn't the first time she'd heard that. 10 minutes later, there I was, standing across from the girl that wasn't smiling kindly at me, but was looking at me with judging eyes. I guess she already knew who I was. "Victoria. I was wondering when you would come here." "Jasmine. Please let me face your strongest team." I greeted in turn and she nodded, pulling one of her 6 Pokeballs on her hip. She was already prepared for this. The referee wasn't Bugsy this time, and then finally it began. "Go. Steelix," she called, and I blinked. That was her ace, I think? Oh well. Go. My blue heart. I cheered and threw. Opposite the enormous Steelix, Gyarados appeared, roaring his rage, as he looked on at the Pokemon across from him. Gyarados!" Jasmine cried out in shock at his appearance, even taking a step back for a moment, before firming her resolve. "I didn't know you had one. This is his first Johto battle," I called out in turn. Jasmine and I having a stare down, even as Gyarados and Steelix did as well. A moment went between all of us. Steelix was pissed at Gyarados, and my blue heart was equally pissed at Steelix. A rivalry. Then it was time to begin. "Steelix. Rock throw. Get him. Use Aqua Tail." I called out. Gyarados wasn't as good at picking moves against different types, but what he could do was get into the fight. Rocks were launched at him as Steelix swiped its steel tail into the ground and flung them, but my blue heart roared in rage as he charged. Water flowing up his tail as he surged across the ground, sort of like a snake. He wasn't as fast without flying, but Steelix wasn't exactly a quick Pokemon. The first rock bashed Gyarados in his face and I winced in sympathetic pain, but he ignored it, his roar of rage growing only louder as he plowed through. Smashing his head into Steelix, seemingly uncaring about the fact, he bashed his head into a chunk of steel as his tail flashed out. Steelix wasn't unaffected though, he was pushed back, and roared back in pain, when a moment later the Aqua Tail lifted the steel type off the ground, bending it over at the force of the blow. Gyarados wasn't quite as fully fleshed out as Arcanine. He had gotten the least amount of gravity training of my main team, besides Lucario. But he was also a Gyarados, and Gyarados were good at brutal physical fighting. "Steelix. Thunder Fong. Gyarados. Lightning Rod." I demanded and grinned as he couldn't pull back fast enough to escape the bite, but he didn't need to. A moment later the lightning arcing between Steelix's fangs clamped onto Gyarados, but his tail was covered in steel-type energy and a moment later it flowed over him and then down. Instantly, I noticed Jasmine figuring out my trick, and I think there was actually a hint of respect in her eyes. "Now. Waterfall." I roared out and Gyarados surged, water blew upwards from around where he touched the ground, and slammed into Steelix, and it only pushed Gyarados further, as his whole body bent into the blow. Waterfall was probably his strongest water-type move after all. Considering how often he had climbed the waterfall to evolve. Steelix roared in pain. "No. Steelix. Don't let him push you around." Jasmine yelled out, and the steel snake turned and slammed into Gyarados once more with a thunder fong. Considering Gyarados was surging up in water, I winced as my poor blue heart roared in pain, but it swiftly turned to anger. And he slammed an aqua tail into Steelix, to try and remove him. I watched as the two snakes curled against each other. Basically failing to properly keep distance, they simply slammed whatever move they could into the other as they rolled and tumbled. The ground shook, the arena quaked. I rushed back, grabbing Bugsy and pushing us down as the two rolled past us, crushing the area we had just been in their brutal battle. But then it happened. Gyarados had gotten his fangs into Steelix and lifted. A moment later, Steelix hung in Gyarados' mouth, moving to try and escape as Gyarados hefted the incredibly heavy Pokemon up. I watched as light grew. Steelix! Jasmine shouted, but I had my own orders. That's right. Blue Heart. You'll win this fight. Here we go. That power is burning hot. Its strength tells you to grasp victory. Hyper Beam. I roared out in delight at what was happening. Much to Bugsy's shock, as I was practically sitting on him, and then everything in the arena went white. A blast of energy erupted from my laser fish, slamming point blank into Steelix, that couldn't escape, no matter how hard he tried. The energy had nowhere to go. Only out, so it slammed into him and sheared off, blasting sideways out of Blue Heart's mouth. The arena suffered, but I didn't care, because Steelix roared as Gyarados let out everything he had. Then it grew dark and Gyarados slumped, dropping Steelix, who crashed into the arena floor. Then quiet followed. Gyarados was huffing strongly, obviously exhausted. I winced as I saw that he was injured from his battle. Steelix had definitely left its mark. But I waited. He deserved a chance to celebrate his victory. Steelix is unable to battle. The referee finally called out a moment later. Gyarados roared to the sky, before turning to me. Good job. I cheered, and his roar took on a happy note as he slithered over and pushed himself right into me. Of course he ended up lifting me off my feet, but that was no problem. Just held on to his face as he delighted in my hug. Great job. I knew you could do it. You're amazing. I called, words just for him, and that was enough to satisfy my lonely boy. I was back on my feet soon, and I returned him, even as Jasmine, having already returned Steelix, sent out another Pokemon. This time a Magneton. Placing Blue Heart's Pokeball back on my belt, I ran my hand across them to find the next Pokemon that Jasmine would face. Go. Lucario. Jasmine fell to her knees shortly after returning her Skarmory. Dragonite roared, hands raised up as she proclaimed her victory, not something I'd normally see in her, but that Skarmory had been tough. That and her Forretress, that had hit Dragonite the battle just before, with a Euro Ball. Considering that move got stronger, compared to the differences in speed between each Pokemon, and Dragonite was all about that speed. It had really knocked Dragonite around, but she had taken that personally, and had decided to crush Jasmine's last Pokemon in turn to really push through her dislike of being struck so powerfully. I walked across the battlefield even as Jasmine continued to stay sunk on her knees. There was always a bit of empathy in that I hated losing too. But in order for me to win, I had to make others lose. To overcome the politics, it meant I had to become someone who only won. Dragonite walked over beside me, our eyes met and I smiled as she was still looking tough and fearsome, but I knew all she wanted to do was get healed up and get pampered by her hubby. I nodded to her, and then looked to Jasmine. That was an amazing battle. I couldn't knock out any of your Pokemon. She whispered and I nodded at that. Gyarados was the closest. But Lucario had fought well, winning once. She was growing well, and in the end, I had pulled her back because she wouldn't have managed another victory. Then Arcanine had gotten her turn. I returned my Pokemon, so it's not like I'm untouched. I countered, trying to be nice. She released a scoff that was all air as she looked up. There were tears in her eyes, but there was also a sense of steel in behind the tears. I've never been beaten so hard before. She eventually decided and rose up. It won't happen again. She demanded as she towered over me, and I felt my own smile grow from my awkward apologetic one-to-one that was all teeth and fangs. Good. Face me again. Get stronger and stronger. Challenge me again and again. I demanded, and the girl stepped back abruptly. Ah. That might have been a bit too much. I laughed, rubbing at the back of my head. I look forward to facing you again. You really surprised me with some of your moves. Your Skarmory is crazy. You took out Steelix before I could. I heard from Whitney, and so I sent my ace out first. Usually the others do some prep work to buff him up when I'm doing serious battles. I underestimated you. She offered, and I blinked because that was interesting. That meant our next battle would be even better. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a case. When she opened it, she looked through it and slowly brought out a badge. The mineral badge is given to trainers that have proven that they have forged their Pokémon to steel. I offer it to you. With a star to prove you have overcome the Olivine City Gym today, and forever. Thank you. I offered out, taking the badge from her with gentle hands and smiling as I showed it to Dragonite, who looked proud, but not interested in it. I took out my case and popped it open, and I heard her gasp as I slowly inserted it inside. She was tall enough that she was looking down and able to see the case. Is that? It's the proof of my journey so far, I said after a while. I wasn't sure what else to say, but it seemed to have been enough. Jasmine swallowed and then nodded. You. Whitney was being a brat. She decided after a moment with a grumble and a look that wasn't at me, but at something far away. You've definitely earned my badge. I look forward to seeing this year's conference. You'll see me there. I agreed, and that was that. I turned and Bugsy waved goodbye to Jasmine. I didn't have the heart to tell him that I don't think Jasmine recognized him either. Poor Bugsy. He was too new of a gym leader that the others didn't even recognize him outside of his gym. I looked over and his eyes weren't really following me. Bugsy had the eyes of a boy that wanted a battle. I smirked and turned away. I'd give him another one, but not now. We needed to rest everyone up. And maybe ride Arcanine to possibly the most dangerous gym in Johto. Even including the Blackthorn gym. Mahogany Town was ruled over by Price. Price, who had been one of the most powerful Johto trainers for so long, he was practically an institution. He was also in Mahogany Town. I kept my head on a swivel looking for the one thing I expected I wouldn't see until it was too late as we entered Mahogany Town. Ninjas. Just like Fuchsia was Kanto's ninja town, Mahogany Town was literally called the hiding place of ninjas. At least I was pretty sure this wasn't the manga, and Price wasn't actually an evil big bad. But he was likely going to be pissed with a Kanto trainer showing up. BRRR, behind me, I noticed Bugsy shivering a bit. Shorts are nice, until it suddenly starts snowing. I reminded him and he nodded. Luckily Arcanine was nice and warm and Bugsy was warming his hands against her fur. Arcanine on the other hand? I looked over her head and noticed her tongue sticking out as she kept attacking the snowflakes that flowed past her head. Alright, just take us to the Pokemon Center, and we can do some running around. Arc. She cheered and took off, causing Bugsy to yelp as he held on to me tightly to keep from falling off. Arcanine raced through the sleepy snowy town, and it didn't take us long to find the Pokemon Center and slide inside. Literally. Arcanine. I scolded her but she didn't care. Having barely slowed for the automatic doors, she ended up sliding on the ice purposefully, even sitting a bit and letting herself spin around as we all came flying into the center. Ow. Bugsy whispered, but he was okay, and I reached down and helped him up. Oh. Welcome? Nurse Joy called out, and then I noticed her eyes widening as she saw me. This was going to become a thing, wasn't it? Okay. Bugsy offered, returning to the main room now wearing pants and a jacket, where Blissey was happily chatting with Nurse Joy's Chansey as Nurse Joy gushed over Blissey. I smiled at Blissey's happiness, because she enjoyed the happiness that her presence brought. Even if it was embarrassing her a little. She hadn't even had anyone eat her egg yet. Waving to Bugsy, I looked away from those three. Great. Arcanine is warming up with some more runs, but I'll be heading to see Price soon. I told him and he nodded firmly. Do you think you'll win? Price isn't like the others. Bugsy added, and I frowned. Yeah. Johto had a lot of newbie gym leaders. Kanto did too after all, but I had already fought the best. I nodded. I've fought the best. Kanto has already too. Even the old guys. Blaine was strong. Really strong. I can beat Price. I told him and he nodded slowly, not looking like he quite believed me. Is that what you think? A voice growled out and I looked towards the door. Price had just walked in, stalking in the snow coating his boots as he casually knocked off the powder. I rose up, because there was a reason he was here, and it was me. That's right, I said, firmly, and the old man's scowl grew dark. Real rage covered his face. This was a man that hated me. Then come, I'll show you the strength of a glacier, he demanded, and I nodded. Our eyes had met after all. He turned and instantly came face to snout with a lightly panting Arcanine. Arcanine had been sent out on a run after all, and she returned instantly. She lapped across Price's face in a greeting and walked right past him, prancing as she entered the Pokémon Center to look at me. I felt myself shift into a smile, fighting as my lips wanted to quirk up. The look on Price's face was picture-worthy. I bet Blaine would give me real Pope dollars for it. But I turned to focus on Arcanine. Hey Arcanine, you ready for a battle? And of course at the B word it was all over. It was time to battle. A note from Seras. I hope you enjoy. Chapter 73. I felt my teeth clatter together. Price's opening act had been to slam some sort of bastard child of hail and blizzard into each other, and it had started snowing like crazy ever since, literally blocking out sight with how dense it was, and I was pretty sure he could keep powering it up with another hail. Or scarily, it might be self-perpetuating. If not for my goggles, I might not even be able to see through just how cold the world around me was. But it didn't matter. Arcanine's fire had cut through Pokemon after Pokemon, and then when I finally pulled her back, Lucario had come out, to get experience of what Pokemon battles were like at the highest peak. She hadn't managed a KO, but she had weakened Price's dugong enough that my blue heart had knocked it out. Then had managed a good deal of damage before we ended up where we were now. Price's Lapras against Milotic, his final Pokemon. My lazy fish was going all out. Water against ice and water. But Price was a fucking asshole. Wake up Milotic, I called out, as Price had taken brutal advantage of just how many status effects Lapras could inflict. Frozen, sleep, and confusion, all while dropping blizzards constantly on the field. Me. Milotic awoke as Lapras smashed another massive chunk of ice where he had been a moment before. Lapras was using some variant of sheer cold, I think, to make icebergs in the arena, and then surfed to smash them into Milotic whenever he was disabled. Milotic was doing well against it, but they were still brutal attacks. The iceberg might have been dodged, but it didn't stop and hit the solid earth around the lake that we were fighting in, that had once been nothing but solid ice until Arcanine had melted it down, and Price had used it to launch an insanely powerful avalanche. It was lucky that Arcanine wasn't a Charmander, or else she might have gone out if she had been dunked into the freezing water so hard. But Milotic was in his element, and suddenly all of Price's work to defeat my fire type was working against him. Lapras, realizing its iceberg had missed, dived into the water to prepare another one, but Milotic was in the water too. And I could feel it. The way he had shifted and cried out when he woke back up. The water blasted out of his spouts when he realized he had been put to sleep again. A moment later, Lapras was launched out of the water, Milotic under the Lapras, with his tail covered in dragon scales. Dragon Tail wasn't his strongest move, but it was a strong, normally effective move in this case. Lapras hit the water again with a massive splash, and through the snow that still coated everything I could see Price, his own face covered in goggles, and a bandana, was not pleased. Milotic. Twister. I shouted at him, and I saw his eye shift to me for a second, confirming he had heard me. A moment later, he dived into the water, just as Lapras breached the surface, already shooting ice beams around to make room. Then from the water a purple tornado shot out, but it wasn't just the dragon-type energy, along with it came water. Lapras reacted with an ice beam blasting against the energy of the Twister and slowing it, but it was still sucking water into it, and finally when the attacks finished there was an iceberg of my own. Milotic surged forth and his tail was cocked back. Price yelled something, but I couldn't hear him. The sound of the blizzard and cracking ice made any orders given by one of us incredibly hard to hear from the other. And then it was launched. The massive spike of ice was aqua-tailed right out of the water and smashed into Lapras with terrific force. I smiled as water shot forward in a wave, and even Price had to jump back to avoid the wave of freezing water that nearly swamped him. Try to freeze me out? Let's see how you like being dunked in Arctic water yourself, Ice Boy. Lapras shook off the attack, once more opening her mouth and singing, and I watched as Milotic froze, his eyes blinking slowly as he fought it, but then he slumped once more asleep. And once more, the battle reset. I smirked as Lapras used Life Dew. At least I'm pretty sure that's what the move was, and some of the wounds it had taken faded away as it restored its health. Milotic's Aqua Ring was already working. What Price didn't know is that Milotic had already used Safeguard once he woke up and had a chance. The moment he heard sing, he had just instantly used Recover and pretended to be asleep. I wasn't kidding when I said it was a reset. Between the two, Milotic had definitely recovered more health, and Lapras and Price now both thought they had the advantage. I watched in the water, as Milotic slowly curled up. Price might have been able to catch it, but I doubted he could see very clearly, not with how much of a mess we had just made of the water and the snow still falling. Coil increased attack, defense, and accuracy of moves. Once the move was complete, it was time. Extreme Dragon Tail. I roared out as loud as I could to be heard over the noise. A momentary flicker, as Milotic opened his eyes, and then a blur, a noise so familiar echoed out, and suddenly Milotic was gone. Extreme Speed. I could tell I caught Lapras and Price off guard as neither reacted before it was already over. The only thing that remained was the half-second of cavitation through the water that connected where Milotic had been, to where Lapras had been. Because the poor Lapras was smashed hard enough to fly out of the water as Milotic showed just how much the lazy fish had been forced into muscle training. Price had nearly been knocked off his feet as Lapras landed near him, the poor thing's eyes were all dizzy. Knocked out. Huh. I didn't expect a knockout there. I thought it would have taken another hit. Finally, Price grabbed a pokeball and a moment later, Lapras was gone. Me-I. Milotic whistled out through his spouts as he leapt out of the water, showing off how pretty he was, before splashing down. Neither Price or I moved after. Even as Milotic splashed around in delight. Only once the blizzard finally ended, letting us have some ability to see, did we both move. The arena was a mess, and I could hardly see the ground. Water had splashed up everywhere and it was literally freezing. Slowly we each stepped down from our battle locations. Old stone, carved into platforms near the lake. Each taking our own path, as we picked our way back towards the building that had a heated room. Bugsy was sitting outside of it, still rubbing his hands together as he had stayed out to watch. Price reached it first. The old man had a lot of experience walking over the stone ice and freezing water. He stepped right past Bugsy and into the almost blistering hot room. But I wasn't heading there right away. At the edge of the lake I turned and Milotic was there. He was aware enough not to start rubbing against me, but while I was definitely cold, he seemed unbothered by the cold. You did amazing. I told him. Me. He shouted out a whistle cry before wiggling in delight. I'm so impressed right now. But I'm also super duper freezing. You want to return? I asked and he nodded. We'll talk later. I told him as I placed his pokeball on my belt with frozen fingers and hurried to the building. Bugsy looked relieved when I arrived and opened the door as I rushed in. Close the door. The old man scolded, but he did once we were both inside, and Price glared. As he had already collapsed into a big comfy chair, around a fire pit, only it didn't have a fire, but a slugma sleeping in it. Bugsy and I both hurried over and stuck out our hands shivering despite the heat as I felt warmth spread back through my hands. Beaten by a child. Price finally spoke and I looked up to meet his eyes. Anger and disgust continued to mar his face, but there was something else there. A hint of respect buried under everything. You're strong. I told him, honestly. TSK. You beat 3 of my Pokemon with just that Arcanine. Strong. If you hadn't just beaten me, I'd ask if you even know the meaning of the word. He grumbled a bit. Then spoke again. You defeated me. It's yours. He tossed something and I fumbled to grab it, before managing. The Glacier Badge, with a star. And you. If the old master of Azalea Town could see his successor now. Following around a Kanto girl. Bugsy jerked back as if struck, but to my surprise, he didn't fold. Vicky agreed to let me accompany her, and I've learned a lot. I've seen more high-end battles in the last week than I have. Ever. He answered truthfully. It showed me a lot. My own weakness, especially. I don't think I bring shame to anyone in realizing how much I still have to learn. His retort sent Price back a bit, but the old man scoffed. Good, grow strong. But keep in mind what it means for her to be from Kanto. You'll face her someday, on a battlefield. Or as she comes to raid your home. If she does, then I'll fight her. Bugsy said, shocking me as he sat up. But maybe if we make friends. Maybe there won't be any fighting anymore. Friends, what a pointless concept. You'll understand someday, when those friends of yours betray you. Price responded back, then he turned to me. Once you are warm, get out. I have to allow you to battle the gym, doesn't mean I have to like a damn Canton brat stay any longer than that. Sure. I offered, and instead of staying any longer, I stood up. Time to have a brisk walk to the Pokemon Center. I'm sorry. Bugsy offered as we flopped onto the not quite as warm Pokemon Center, but with my Pokemon handed off Arcanine would likely be out and about soon acting as a good space heater. What? I asked then, as I looked up from my paper cup of hot chocolate that Nurse Joy had given Bugsy and I when we came in. I guess facing Price meant a lot of kids came in freezing their butts off. About Gym Leader Price. He shouldn't have spoken like that. Bugsy said then, and I just started laughing. Which was probably a bit mean. It's not funny. It kinda is. Listen, Purse has his reasons, and I don't like them either. But I also just don't care. Bugsy looked at me in surprise. What? You should. It takes too much energy to care what other people think. I'm just going to live my life, and the people that are angry or bitter? That's not my problem. So I'm just not going to worry about it. If I have to, I'll just fight Price again. I laughed at that, and Bugsy nodded slowly. Bugsy in the end looked away. He still shouldn't have treated you like that. We're Jotuns, we are supposed to be better than that. You know, Bugsy, if you think so? Then just show people that you are better and other people will follow. I said, and then I smiled. I think, if you are the normal Jotun, then they are pretty nice actually. I laughed as he flushed a bit, and nodded. Now? Now just wait for Nurse Joy to finish healing my team. It was time to face my final challenge. The sun wasn't quite setting, but considering Blackthorn City was up in the mountains, it felt later as we flew through the mountain passes. I didn't even need to guide Dragonite so much. Not here. No, we just looked around and could practically follow the signs. If the markings of dragons scraping the mountains wasn't enough. If the slight smell that I associated with Dragonite wasn't there. If the faint sound of Dragonite noises echoed off the mountains wasn't enough. It was the fact that as soon as we entered the mountain space, we had followers. Dragonite flew by, some coming down close to take a look, before flying away. All of them were trained Pokemon. Not a single wild one among the bunch. Just Dragonite living their lives in the mountains, when not with their trainer coming to check out the new arrival. Then we cleared around the side of a mountain, following a road that hugged the mountain, and it opened up into a basin. Probably a volcanic one if I had to guess. And there it was. A full city. And a whole lot of dragons. Dragonite looked back at me, as we flew in, and I nodded. We both knew what we were here for. Dragonite slowed to a hover and I could feel her muscles clenching under us. Well, what's going on? Bugsy asked, over the wind, but I ignored him for a moment. Because Dragonite let it all out. A roar, a release of all the power she had gained, a statement and a challenge. Instantly many Dragonite bolted away. Some that I could see around the area looked up, but Dragonite were pretty chill. So none of them seemed to rush to react. Except one. It only took a minute before we got a response. An echo of a roar returned to us, and out from a large compound sectioned off in one part of the city, came a rather large Dragonite. I could tell, because despite being far away, it was still very visible. And as it approached, I expected Claire. Lance should still be in Kitakami after all, but I was doubly surprised. Riding casually on this rather large Dragonite's back was actually an old man. What little hair on his head long gone white, bushy white beard, and eyebrows that covered his eyes practically. He rode the Dragonite like he was just sitting at a table to eat lunch. This was a dragon master. I felt my smile widen into a feral grin. The Dragonite was ancient. His scales gone slightly pale around the edges, and more than a few scars covered the dragon's face, giving him a fierce mien, if not for his big cute eyes that spoke to me of curiosity more than anger. "Oh no!" Bugsy whispered into my ear as his arms gripped me tight, but I realized there wasn't going to be a fight right away. The Dragon Master waved down and I nodded, Dragonite, following back to the large compound that he had come from. Following him, I glanced down and laughed at all the people on the streets below looking up to see what was going on. We landed in a sand garden, but the old Dragonite didn't seem to care that his footsteps ruined the careful waves. We landed opposite, and followed the Dragon Master's move to slide off onto solid ground. Dragonite then rose up and stared down the old dragon. Well, stared up, but surprisingly, the big old dragon seemed a bit hesitant at her fiery glare. Maybe it was the fact she was flexing, showing off muscles under her scales, that rippled with tension. Yeah. It was definitely the muscles. The old man walked over, slowly using a wooden cane to step forward. There standing before Dragonite, he rose up straighter, which didn't seem entirely comfortable, but he looked up at Dragonite, looking her over quietly. "And what's this?" "Not one from our stock. Looks more like..." "Ah, yes, I recognize that coloration." "How is the island?" he asked me and I twitched, before smiling. "Pretty." "Yes, it was." "She was wild when you met her?" "She was a Dragonair then." "Ah, how wonderful." "I am ALD Blackthorn." "Ah. Victoria Ferrous. Of Viridian City." "Nice to meet you," I greeted with a bow that he returned with a small dip, mostly as it seemed difficult to get lower. "You have a strong bond between each other. How about becoming my apprentice, His rough, almost tired voice asked suddenly, and I just blinked at the sudden question. I could hear Bugsy gasp behind me. I wasn't so completely stupid as to realize that what the old man, who was definitely the master of the Blackthorn, had just said was a big deal. "But I don't need a master," I said, denying him with an apologetic smile. "Love, good food, and working together. And hugs." I ticked off my fingers. "That's all that a dragon master needs to know," I said, firmly, reaching over and patting Dragonite, who shifted from me mugging the older dragon to looking happily at me, even reaching over and patting my head. She agreed, and we smiled together. The old man actually went stock still for a moment, like I had just hit him with a thunderbolt. Then, with a wheezy noise, he started laughing nearly hysterically. Bending over onto his cane, he laughed and laughed. I wasn't offended. Instead, I felt my smile growing, and burst into my own laughter. The two of us laughed in delight, two people understanding each other. Finally he caught his breath, coughing a bit, which sounded a bit weak, but finally he spoke again. "For a young girl from Kanto, to understand dragons so well? Ah, perhaps the world truly has changed. No, perhaps we simply were too stubborn to change with it." "You speak the truth. You have the heart of a dragon," he said, and I actually flushed a little in pleasure at being acknowledged. Now I just needed everyone to accept my official title of Dragon Master. I was ready to get rid of the self-proclaimed part of it. "Nonsense!" a voice yelled out, disturbing the atmosphere. And there was Claire coming flying in on a Dragonair before leaping off it to land in the sand with a 3-point landing. She rose, flaring her cape, and instantly turned to the master. "Don't say such things, grandfather. This is a girl from Kanto. Our enemy," she argued, and the old man said nothing, under the blue-haired woman's onslaught, and then she turned to me. "You. Just because you managed to find yourself a Dragonite, doesn't she cut herself off when she looked away from me, and took in my girl in all her glory. Doesn't mean you are worthy?" she finally said, and I realized that Claire hadn't expected Dragonite. No one expected the muscle mommy Dragonite. Dragonite meanwhile looked at the Dragonair that Claire had ridden on, and with a snort of air, the Dragonair flinched. "You speak from hatred, and not your heart," the Dragon Master said then, and reached up to pat Claire on the shoulder. "Ease your heart, and listen." "Grandfather." This. Now isn't the time for that. This girl, Claire looked at me, and her glare was fully set. You may have beaten the young gym leaders of Johto, but this is where your little invasion ends. You will find the Blackthorn gym to not be as unprepared for battle as the others. I fought Price though? I interrupted. Claire had set her hands on her hips and let her cape flap in the breeze that I realized that Dragonair was causing. Okay, that was a good idea. Taking a note. But my interruption caused her to twitch and her haughty look shifted once more to hot-headed anger. That's not the point. She yelled at me as she tried to loom over me. Hey. That's not fair. Bugsy suddenly interrupted, but then he quailed under Claire's glare. Vicky isn't doing anything wrong. He mumbled out. She's trying some political stunt to make Kanto seem more powerful than Johto. Of course she is doing something wrong. Actually, I'm doing this to shut up the Pokemon Association and make sure that none of them get the idea they can take my friends away. I told her honestly. And maybe to mess with Lance a little bit. But Lance is cool, so it's more about being able to tease him later. My words had Claire go silent as her mouth dropped open a bit at the statement I just dropped on her. That? No, this is the Blackthorn Gym, and I am Claire. Heir to the Blackthorn clan. You won't take another badge. This is where this all ends. Claire called out, once more trying to look regal with her cape. But she does realize what she just said, right? I considered not poking her, but she was reminding me of something, and I just had to. I mean, you are the last gym, so obviously this is where it ends? I prompted. Smirking a bit as her mouth once more dropped open a tiny bit and an exhale of air left her as she seemed to only grow more enraged. Now what was my brain trying to connect here? There was something about this. Angry. Dragon. Angry. Dragonair. Oh. I get it now. You're one of those dragons. The one that is still super defensive and quick to anger, because your pride was stung. Aw man, you remind me of that one Dragonite. And Dragonair. I muttered. Iris and her dragon. And Dragonite's former paramour from the island. I wonder what happened to that Dragonair. Last I had seen of him, he had tucked his tail and ran away after Milotic knocked him out. Ah well. I focused back on Claire, who was making a noise similar to a kettle, and the gentle chuckle of the Dragon Master wasn't helping things. The heart of a dragon indeed. The old man offered, and I noticed a faint wink under his massive eyebrows. Stop playing. Claire came back with a roar and pointed a finger at me, almost like an outstretched claw. You've come to challenge my gym? Then a challenge you will get. She said, hissing out, and I nodded. I caught her eyes, no longer letting her glare matter at all, as I felt my face curve into a sinister smile. Our eyes met. I informed her, and that was all that needed to be said. A note from Seras. Thank you all for reading. Chapter 74. The Blackthorn Arena was really big, ornate, and set up with a large pool of water in the middle. As we all walked in, I noticed Claire twitch as the old master settled onto a bench on the side of the arena to watch. But then she shook it off and focused on me. Challenger of Blackthorn. You stand upon the peak of battle. Prepare yourself. She roared out, and I heard the speech in her tone. This was probably what she said to everyone that came through. This will be a 6-on-6 match. No returns. The girl that appeared out of a side room spoke up. She was obviously the referee. Claire. I called out then before we could throw out our Pokemon. I'm going to start with my Dragonite. I informed her and held out the Pokeball. She glared and nodded. Perfectly understanding. And then it was called, and we both tossed our Pokeballs into the arena. Draw. They both called out. My Dragonite was the more aggressive of the two, but that was to be expected. She was here to prove a point after all. That's right, Dragonite. We'll make them choke on calling you weak. I called out, and that got Dragonite even more fired up. Claire scoffed, but I could see her Dragonite shift. Her Dragonite was shaped more like Lance's. A bit tubby if I was honest. But wider, bulkier in frame. It wasn't nearly as large as her cousin's partner. This Dragonite was strong, but... Begin. Go. I roared out, at the same time Claire said her own move. But it was too late for that. The dragon pulse that her Dragonite began charging was cut off, a dragon rush slammed into the Dragonite and my girl made no motion to stop as she simply kept pushing. A moment later, Claire yelped as her Dragonite was launched straight past her into the building and a torrent of dust and debris swept over her. Drea! Dragonite roared as she floated over the water. That had been a brutal opener. Dragonite! Claire called out, but not in worry, but in anger. Return it. Draw. The roar came out of the dust as suddenly, the buzz of noise I attributed to extreme speed was heard. I just grinned. Claire's Dragonite exploded out of the dust, extreme speed making it blur as it rushed my girl. But my Dragonite fought with Arcanine. Claire's Dragonite was crazy fast for a moment, but when it ended, my Dragonite had managed to grab the claw that was aiming for her face, even if it sent both of them rocketing into the ground. Unfortunately for Claire, while her dragon was bigger than mine, mostly in width, I had no doubt what was going to happen next. Dragonite pushed and suddenly, Claire's dragon yelped and then was slammed sideways as a dragon tail slammed into her side. The massive energy scales covering Dragonite's tail made it look like a club as it smashed into the other dragon, and then they were launched back once more, smashing into the water of the pool. Then everything got quiet for a second. Claire looked from the pool to my Dragonite, and then to me. And I knew that this match was already over. Because in her eyes I saw the failure of any dragon. Fear. But then Claire's eyes hardened, and that fear turned into anger. Huh. Claire was like Iris's Dragonite. Some dragons, when you prick their pride, would jump to anger, but for fear to bring up anger as well? No wonder Iris's Dragonite rampaged so much. Dragonite! Claire called out. This isn't over. She called, and I knew that she was telling Dragonite to start some trick. Dragon dance. I called out, and Claire took that in without giving any show of what she felt. Then the wind picked up. Ah, I think I get it. The water suddenly surged out of the pool as a hurricane gathered it all up and turned a hurricane into a waterspout. And in that surge of water, Claire's Dragonite was in charge. The difference between the way I trained my Dragonite and the way Claire, and maybe the Blackthorn all did, I focused on turning her into a monstrous bruiser. Using her defensive ability to just let her keep pushing. They focused on defense and special attacks. The hurricane shifted and slammed into Dragonite, not that it would truly hurt her, but a moment later I caught Claire's plan. Because the entire thing started freezing. Ice, huh? I muttered, as I caught it. Claire's Dragonite came launching itself through the waterspout, spinning around as a smaller tornado of ice, and freezing the wind and water together. She reached Dragonite and slammed into her, and even I winced at the noise of just how much ice the Dragonite had dragged up with her. A moment later it was over, and the waterspout finished freezing over, as Claire's Dragonite rushed out of the top, leaving my girl frozen inside. But, while it was a really fancy move, it was complicated and intricate, it had one weakness. Too weak. I called out, loud enough for Claire to hear, and her head locked towards me like I had just punched her. That's a nice combo move, but Dragonite already finished Dragon Dance. I called out, and then we all heard it. The ice cracked, then more, and suddenly it burst apart with the sound of a chainsaw blasting through it. Claire's Dragonite had stopped moving to see. Slow. The Pokémon was too used to stopping mid-battle to look and see if her enemy was still fighting. Claire's Dragonite was bulky, but it only made her a wider target. Claire's Dragonite had a moment where suddenly her vision was flooded by an angry dragon, but without the time to react. Claire was far too used to fighting gentle battles, where you never accidentally hit a trainer with an attack. Did she never have a Lieutenant Surge tell her the dangers? Or a Blaine to almost throw terrain hazards at her? You don't stop just because you wanted to see if your move would work. You slip into another move. If you hit an enemy with a rock, start using a buff move while they get out. If you smashed an enemy away, charge up another attack for when they come back. I nodded to myself. I was still learning. Still had much to gain from every battle, and this was one of them. I'd remind my team about it on the next training session. And have them all trained to instantly switch to something else and not just stand around to see if the battle is over. The ground shifted under me for a second at the force of Dragonite plowing Claire's dragon into the ground with a dragon rush as big as I had ever seen from her. Dragonite was fully engaged in this battle, and Claire, for all her anger, wasn't synergizing with her partner. Dragonite. Dragon dance. I called out instantly once Dragonite burst away from the crater she had created, and she jumped to listen. Then I turned to Claire. You're too angry. I called out, your Dragonite isn't, so you aren't synced up. Either get your dragon angry, or calm down. I yelled at her, and she looked for a second like she was going to blow her top. Then she stopped and breathed. And as she did, her Dragonite rose itself out of the dirt, wincing a bit as it weakly rose. Dragonite. Claire called, but this time it wasn't anger, and the two finally synced up. A moment later, her Dragonite was in the air rushing forward once more, but not quite at extreme speed levels. Did she not train her Pokemon to use extreme speed to move around? It wasn't like you had to have a Pokemon use fly to fly in the air. You could have them move at their top speed using a tiny bit of the extreme speed energy before switching it to another. I mean, I had discovered that with Arcanine years ago. Then again, extreme speed was a Blackthorn Dragonite special, and not something that is normal for the species. So maybe they just never integrated it? I shook it off. Claire's Dragonite made its move. As it approached, I caught it. Protect. I roared out as I caught the trace sign of power building up. Dragonite didn't hesitate, crossing her arms and building a protect shield as the energy suddenly unleashed. The wave of power was pretty intense. One of the strongest hyper beams I had ever seen ripped out of the Dragonite's mouth. It rolled over my girl, the energy shooting off sharply as it deflected off the protect shield. And then it was over. Claire's Dragonite gasped heavily, too tired to do much as the smoke cleared and Dragonite roared, claws of dragon energy shooting from her claws, and she charged into a dragon rush. Dragonite. Return. Claire called out and her partner vanished from the crater it had been smashed into. She looked at her Pokeball with a long conflicted look on her face, before finally putting it back on her hip. Then her eyes met mine. You. Very well. Grandfather is right. She said, and then drew another Pokeball. You have the heart of a dragon, I'll acknowledge that. But that has nothing to do with this. And I won't let you win so easily. Go. Dragonite. I gasped in delight, another Dragonite. Did she trick me and not use her strongest right at the start? I couldn't tell. This one wasn't as big, but it looked. A different build? Claire's second Dragonite roared out in challenge, long and loud. Yes. I said, without restraint as I felt Dragonite's returning roar. She was a little beat up, but that was that, and this was this. Dragonite had some recovery moves. And she had a dragon dance already buffing her, but I couldn't let Claire think I only knew how to dragon rush. We won't be stopped. Claire. Fight me. Show me everything you have, but don't think for a second that I won't show you what I can do too. Dragonite. Draco Meteor. I held at the top of my lungs, and Dragonite joined me. A screaming wind ripped apart as Dragonite swallowed the orb of draconic energy that formed in front of her. The look Claire gave me was one of horror. Of disbelief. She couldn't accept that I knew this move. The old master though? Him I noticed was smiling brightly, like Christmas had just come early. And I left, letting my delight echo across the battlefield as the energy of Draco Meteor descended, coming to wipe out everything that dared to exist. I can't believe you would do that. Claire shrieked at me, but I was far too happy to care. Dragonite hadn't managed a full sweep. Too many dragon and ice attacks had finally taken her out, but pulling out Milotic to take revenge against the Kingdra had surprised Claire enough, especially when Milotic had pulled out dragon move after dragon move. Then of course Claire had finished off with a Gyarados. I just laughed harder as Blue Heart nuzzled up to me. That had been a very quick match. In fact, it had shocked me just how fast my Blue Heart had battered Claire's Gyarados into unconsciousness. Maybe she just didn't train it right? But now Claire was complaining about the damage to the arena. What had once been a nice fancy little arena with buildings around it and a pool in the center was now just craters and ruins. If you aren't ready for a Draco meteor, don't pick a fight with a dragon master. I proclaimed, fist raised, and laughed harder at the way her face went red. How do you even know about Draco meteor? Grandfather? Claire demanded, looking to the old man that had hobbled over, but he was more interested in Blue Heart, as my sweetheart was perfectly content with cheek rubs as we rubbed our face together. Victoria, he said, then turning away from Garridos to look at me. If you would, I would like to know how your Dragonite learned Draco meteor. It is a unique move, passed down among the dragon clans. I taught it to her, I said, simply looking him in the eye to show that I wasn't joking. Impossible. Only the elders can know the secret to dash. First you raise your draconic energy to its maximum, then bring it all to your chest, condense it, and then release it. I informed her, giving the same instructions I gave to Dragonite so long ago. Claire stalled out, her mouth hanging open, and then I heard some chuckles from the old master. She's got you there, granddaughter, he offered, and then stroked at his beard a bit. And you got me too. You taught your Pokemon the move yourself. To think. Can I ask, where did you learn this move? It's supposed to be a closely guarded secret. Not even my granddaughter knew the instructions, he explained, and I looked at Claire. Yeah, she looked embarrassed that she didn't know. Speaking of Claire, please remember the value of this knowledge. Oh, of course. I won't tell anyone, she stuttered out, but then both of them looked to me. Now how do I explain? I could lie and make up a story about meeting the old lady that Ash learned from. I've been training my Pokemon and enhancing their moves. Compressing their energy is a good way to give their power a bit of a kick. It was mostly an accident, until we figured it out, I explained, and the old man nodded slowly, while Claire continued to look on in disbelief. Draco meteor has been discovered by many across the years. This isn't unheard of. But to think, a child not even of a dragon clan discovering it? Will you not reconsider becoming my apprentice? I assure you, there is much to learn still, even for you. I blinked in surprise at the question. The first time had been almost joking, but now he asked again, and he sounded way more serious. Grandfather. She is still from Kanto. You can't just invite her in. You know the laws. Ah? Yes, that's right. There is a law for such a thing. He mumbled, then surprised me with his beard stroking, and then he smirked under his beard. Well, there is an easy way to ignore that. After all, a dragon master is welcome in Blackthorn from before Johto ever made such silly laws. Victoria Ferrous. I recognize you, someone who recreated Draco meteor, who has a dragon's heart as a dragon master. I pointed at myself and he nodded, making me realize I could actually be knocking off that self-proclaimed section of my title a lot sooner than I expected. GGKYNNNNN. Claire made a choking noise as if her throat was completely sealing shut. But I ignored her breakdown and looked at the old man. No, at ALD Blackthorn. Thank you, I responded honestly. I wasn't sure just what it really meant, and I had been joking about it before, but this was definitely something more serious than just being called a good trainer. It is no issue. It is the duty of the Dragon Masters to grant the title to those that deserve it, he said happily, and then reached out to Claire, who jerked at his touch. He offered. What dash? Oh. She took a deep breath and let it out. Dragon Master Ferrous. She spoke to me, and I jerked a bit at just how official she spoke. Then she reached into her pouch attached to the back of her belt and held out the rising badge. With a star. You have defeated me at my best, proving yourself to have earned this badge. I've never handed this badge out to someone that wasn't from Johto. I want you to know that. I will not let this lie. You've defeated me now, but I'll learn from this defeat and come to challenge you next time. I'll be ready, I said back firmly, because the idea of battling her again wasn't a bad one. Dragon trainers were fun. Once she had managed to regain some semblance of pacing after I knocked out her first 2 Dragonites, she had set up some brutal combos. Unfortunately, they would have worked better with her Dragonite and not desperately trying to play catch-up with her Charizard. I took the badge and looked it over. The dragon-shaped head was cool. I had always liked this badge. I pulled out my badge case and had to struggle a bit to make room for it. The cases weren't meant to carry so many badges. Putting it away, I looked up and into the eyes of Claire and the ALD. I'll think about your offer. It's tempting, like a lot. I love learning new things about my friends, and I'm sure you all know so many things about dragon types, and Dragonite in particular. It sounds amazing, I said, and ALD's beard shifted into a grin at my words. But I've been running all around Johto over the last couple days. All I really want to do is get home and sleep in my own bed. Huh. Of course, ALD said. The doors to the clan will always be open. Dragon Masters, no matter their origin, are welcome here no matter the situation. He reminded me, and that was that. I turned, catching Bugsy's rather shocked eyes at everything that had happened. And noticed he was really standing far away? I tilted my head and looked over at Gyarados, that was still basically looming over me. I smiled and hugged him. So cute. Ah, that's right. The sun is basically down, and I still need to get Bugsy home. Come on, Bugsy. To Azalea Town, I called, and he jerked in surprise at my words, before nodding. Dragonite was a little sore from the battle, but after Nurse Joy looked her over, she was willing and able to fly again. I think she was just as excited to get home as well. Considering she had been there already, it didn't take long at all for us to fly down into sleepy Azalea Town to drop Bugsy off. The only thing was, he had been real quiet on the flight over. As we landed, we stepped off and I looked at him as he looked at me. Rain check on that battle? I asked, because honestly I was tired and wanted to go home. Yeah. I want to do some training first, he said, and I nodded, but neither of us moved. Finally he spoke. You weren't what I was expecting. And you beat Claire. I've beaten all the Kanto gyms. Claire was strong, but I had more trouble with Koga. That's not what I mean. I've learned a lot from you. Moves, strategies. But more importantly, I think I understand now, he said, and he stood up straight. His fluffy hair, usually covering his eyes a bit, was pushed aside. I'll become a bug master. I'll learn everything I can about my friends too. And soon I'll challenge you again. Just like Claire said. Next time it'll be us coming to challenge you. So Dragon Master Vicky. Be ready. He ended his speech pointing a finger at me, and I felt myself practically vibrating at the idea of more fun battles. Yeah. I can't wait, I exclaimed, hands shooting into the sky. Come and challenge me whenever. Learn new things and test them against me. And together, let's grow stronger and show the bonds we have with our friends. Bugsy smiled happily at my words, and then before anything else I stepped in and pulled him into a tight hug. This was really fun. I'm glad you decided to come with. I stepped back and then nodded. Okay. It's late and I want to get home before my parents are in bed. Goodbye for now, Bugsy. Smell ya later. I called out, laughing as I jumped onto Dragonite, and we buzzed off into the sky. I could just faintly hear, smell ya later, echoing back from behind me, making me laugh as Dragonite soared into the sky. I burst through the front door, ignoring the barking of the Growlithe guards as I rushed inside. I found Mama first in the kitchen, looking like she was just finishing washing some dishes. I jumped into the hug that she only barely caught me in time, and I was laughing and hugging and just loving the fact I was home. Vicky! Welcome home. She cheered for me, squeezing me back and holding me tight. Victor! Vicky is home. Mama called out, and Papa was already surging into the kitchen, mostly at the Growlithe packs barking, and then he laughed in delight and swept both Mama and I up into a hug that had me squeeze between him and Mama as he spun us around. It was the best feeling ever, and I never wanted it to end. Of course it did, when Mama laughingly finally poked me to stop hugging her and sit around the couch. Instead, I flopped on top of Arcane, who hoofed a bit at me, but didn't get up from where he was happily flopped across the living room, And I got to enjoy some moments of the Growlithe pack running up and licking my fingers as I lay limply on top of Arcane. But then it was story time. So then Bugsy and I traveled out of Azalea Town. Wait, you traveled with a Johto gym leader, a boy? Papa asked, and I nodded. Yep. Bugsy is a total bug-type nerd, so we got along great. I think he discovered his reasons to train to get strong along the trip. Plus, he helped me out a lot in Goldenrod. But let me tell you the story in order. I started and Papa nodded with just a grumble. Papa was being protective because Bugsy was a boy. That's cute. I wonder if Bugsy would get an Arcanine talk instead of a shotgun talk if he ever came over. The idea had me giggling as I continued. I went through the entire journey. The battles. The evolution of Blissey, and finally. Wait. He called you a Dragon Master? Mama asked, sounding a little faint. Uh-huh. It sounded pretty official and everything. That's because it is Vicky. Mama said, and Papa nodded along. It takes a lot to become a master of a type of Pokemon, and it's not just a title, it's a responsibility. Rangers might reach out to masters of a type if they are facing a difficult Pokemon. You're the only Dragon Master in Kanto. Cool. I said, and snuggled deeper into Arcane's fur. Ah. It smelled like home. Never mind. I'm sure the association will send someone to discuss what it means soon enough. I'm honestly not even sure about it all. Me either. Papa added. Being registered as a master of a type is big. I think the 16-star badges will probably mean more. I offered and reached into my pocket and pulled out my badge case. Mama and Papa both inhaled. Sure, I had told them I had done it, but hearing and seeing were two different things, I guess. Mama reached out and I handed them over, and both of them looked over the shining badges with a look of awe. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I felt myself yawn a bit and my eyes closed. Arcane was so warm. ZZZZ. A note from Seras. Thank you for reading. Chapter 75. I'm awake. I yelped as Arcane stepped up onto my bed. The very act an alarm clock, as I didn't want to have to wash the slobber off my face. I rubbed my eyes and felt the bed shaking from his tail wagging as I sat up. Good morning, Arcane. I told him and earned myself a wet nose pressing into my cheek, earning him a giggle and a few ineffectual swats, as he nuzzled me a bit. Go on, you old dog, leave Vicky alone, she's up. Papa said from the doorway, and Arcane's tail only wagged harder as he stepped off the bed and pushed up against Papa to get some pets from him. I watched for a bit as I stretched and got ready as Papa scritched and petted Arcane's face until his tail was practically a weapon. Morning, Papa. I greeted as I stepped off the bed and yawned a bit. Pillow, I noticed, was still laying on his back, spread-eagled, and showing no signs of waking up. It's funny how well he adapted to being an indoor Pokemon. Morning, Trouble. Papa greeted back. I shuffled over to join Arcane in hugs and attention. In the end, I groaned around my giggles as Arcane simply couldn't hold himself back and started licking, and when a bear of a dog decides he wants to lick, there isn't a force in creation that can stop him. You're leaving? Mama asked, her voice a little off, and I frowned as I met her eyes. I just want to visit everyone else. Like Mimikyu. Well, I was going to start up some more training for the little ones, and probably get my team working on what they've learned. But I can come home after? Mama nodded and placed the plate of food in front of me, but pulled me into a hug. You've been gone so much. Besides, I want to do some clothes shopping as well. You are about to stand in front of everyone in Kanto. She told me, her hug never loosening. What's wrong with my clothes? I asked. I was just in my pajamas right now, but my jeans were fine. They only had a few small rips and tears. And my shirt was still comfy. I mean, it even still fit. I'm sure that growth spurt would be coming any day now though. New clothes. She said instead of anything else, and considering she had me in a hug, I couldn't exactly refuse. Okay. Well, I still need to check up on everyone. I said, and Mama squeezed me a bit before letting go. I know, you've always been responsible with your Pokemon. I was planning on going to Celadon. So how about you meet me there? Oh. That I can do. I said and Mama nodded. Good. We'll have you looking cute for your first conference. Bleg. I'd rather look cool. I argued, cute was for like little girls. At least say pretty. But Mama ignored me, and I just finished my breakfast. I guess today was going to be busy. I rode Arcanine to Fuchsia City after breakfast. A short race across Kanto, and I was there. I'm back. I yelled as Arcanine landed in the backyard of the clan compound. The noise was instantaneous, and I laughed in delight as I opened my arms as so many of my friends charged over. Dratini hit me first, and I spun my little noodle around over and over. Listening to his delighted giggles was all that I needed. I placed a kiss on his head and released Dragonite and Milotic so his parents could snuggle him. Then I released everyone else. Lucario instantly looked up, then running off heading straight towards Riolu, I had no doubt. The gummy that were out and about greeted me happily, and I saw Jangmo rush over to start yipping a greeting as he stopped in front of me. I'm back. I told him and he nodded and struck a pose. Oh. Very nice. You look stronger. I told him and he melted in delight at my words, before rushing off doing his little barking noise happily. Cook 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 cook. A voice screamed out and I just had enough time to stand up and hold my arms as Mimikyu tackled my chest, knocking me onto my butt as dark limbs wrapped around me over and over until I was sure I looked like a mummy. He was back in his Pikachu disguise? No, I realized as it shifted, it wasn't creaking anymore, so this was a fixed disguise. But that was a secondary matter to giving my boy the strongest hug I could. I missed you too. I told him and he only hugged me all the harder. Oh, is that Vicky? Grandpa Roy called out as he stepped out onto the patio and smiled when he saw me. So it is. Hi Grandpa Roy. I'm back. Welcome back. He called and stepped out onto the grass and walked over. Everyone has been behaving themselves. Your Mimikyu was working on something in your closet nearly the whole time, but Elizabeth made sure he ate. What? Mimi? Were you forgetting to eat? You silly bean. I told him as I hugged him tighter. How can I hug you lots and lots if you are skinny and hungry? You have to take care of yourself, even if I'm not right there. I whispered to him and he sort of scrunched up in his disguise, but I just squeezed him tightly for a moment. Heh. So no new Pokemon this time? He asked, and I shook my head. Nope. I didn't travel to Kitakami again. I went to Johto. I said, suddenly realizing that while I had gone I hadn't really told anyone besides my parents what I was doing. Oh? Johto? Yeah. Here, I'll show you. Ah. Mimi? Can you reach into my bag? Nope, other pocket. That's the one. I told him, my arms were pinned by Mimikyu, so I couldn't even reach for my badge case. A minute of talking Mimikyu through the right spot, he pulled out my badge case. See for yourself. I told Grandpa Roy with a smirk, and he looked curious as he opened it. I was already sitting thankfully so I could kick out my legs and the case landed on my jeans and not the ground, as Grandpa Roy had basically dropped it the moment he had taken a look. His face was pale from shock as he looked down at the case as if he was worried it was going to bite him. Was that? All 8 of the major Johto gyms, with Star. I explained, and Grandpa Roy just stared at me for a long time. Finally he seemed to draw himself back together. Well, that's not what I expected to see this morning, he said, and I smirked up at him. Yet Johto weren't expecting me either. I offered, casually feigning casualness, despite the way my lips kept arching into a smirk. That earned me a laugh from Grandpa Roy, who took a moment to regain his composure. Then he went quiet for a while, but finally he spoke, sounding nostalgic. You know, back when your father was a boy, I was there when he set off for his journey. He was in high spirits, but I had my doubts. Victor never was a solid battler. A bit too easily distracted. When he was excommunicated, it was a dark day for the family. For the clan. I did regret that it was the only choice we had. You've more than proven to me that we were wrong to push it. I blinked at the words and nodded. Papa is happy. That's what matters. Heh. Usually it's the adults that say that about the kids. I promise, Victoria. You'll find that you belong with the clan just as much as your father does. I wasn't around when you were younger, and I regret that. But I want you to know, I'm proud of you. I wasn't sure what to say to that. I just smiled and nodded and then went back to squeezing Mimikyu. An hour later, I looked over the yard and felt satisfied. Everyone had been greeted and settled in. Mimikyu was hiding in my hat again, but I had visited all the little ones and spent some time with them. Okay, Mimi. Show me? I asked and he nodded, knocking my hat around a bit as I hurried back inside. Before I had left, I had asked Mimikyu if he wanted to make something for me. I had originally come up with it, just as something to distract him with, as he hadn't liked the idea of me being gone for a few days. The closet was opened and I stepped in, and Mimikyu jumped out, and after a moment he pulled out something from a pile of cloth. More cloth than I had bought for him? Where did all this come from? I asked, and Mimikyu pointed with his shadowy claw at the pile and I nodded. He pointed out of the closet, and I nodded for now. Someone took you to the store? Kuk-kuk. He nodded happily and I smiled. I'd have to find out who did that, and thank them. But then it was time as Mimikyu pulled out something that glittered and shimmered and I felt my smile brightening more and more. It's perfect. I told him, and he cheered happily, waving it around as we both celebrated by bouncing around laughing. I'm here. I called out as Arcanine stopped in front of Mama, and Gram. There you are. Faye. Kept your poor grandmother waiting. Gram grumbled at me, so I jumped off and rushed right at her, for a big hug which she accepted happily and squeezed me back. I missed you too, Gram. Faye. She mumbled, but her tight grip was her honest feelings. Of course, then she jerked back a bit and I blinked. Ah. He. I giggled at Gram's stricken look before she relaxed and glared at my hat. Mimikyu is here too. I informed her, as my hat shifted a bit, revealing Mimikyu. Gram had moved to pat my hair only to run right into Mimikyu. All right, ladies. We have some shopping to do. Mama called out, redirecting us. And I nodded. Arcanine went back in her ball so she could rest, and the four of us all headed into the large department store. Funnily enough, the last time I was here was with Zealous. I'd have to call her and ask if she wanted to do some final training before the conference. It was coming closer and closer. All right, Trouble. Mama said, half sweet and half stern, and I froze at the tone of authority. We are picking out a new outfit, and it will be approved by your grandmother and I. Or else. She said sternly, and I slumped. Definitely no clunky boots then, huh? All right, come out then. Gram demanded, and I did, stepping out and looking anywhere but at the two women. This was so embarrassing. Mama cooed, and that only made my face flush more, and I could feel my cheeks puff up. I don't like it. It's cute. It's a dress. I moaned. Iris might be able to pull the dragon princess look, but that wasn't my style. I don't think she's going to go for it, Mother. Faye. I tried. Gram admitted, and I perked up as suddenly Mama held out a pile of clothes that had been on a bench beside them and... Oh, nice. I cheered because I saw pants. Mimikyu sitting beside Gram slumped a bit, he liked the dress. Mimikyu, it turned out, was entirely too enthused about me finding new clothes. From the way he was reacting, I was pretty sure he was treating it the same way he did his own disguise. Was I just a big Mimikyu with a bad disguise that he wanted to help? The idea had me giggling as I moved forward to take the pile Mama had been hiding. I ran back inside the changing room before anyone could see me in this dress. I carefully pulled it off and looked over the clothes. I noticed that Mimikyu had done a good job. He must have helped, because the colors wouldn't clash with his gift. Smiling at that, I checked it all over. Instead of pants, they were actually leggings, with a bit extra. Pokemon World clothing was pretty durable after all. The black leggings got a grumble from me, but I tried them on, and they fit okay. Then I noticed why they gave me leggings. A skirt. I would have immediately refused. But the coloration was good, and it was kinda swishy. I slipped it on, and noticed it had a slit in the side that started at mid-thigh, making it a sort of athletic skirt. It also matched the colors of Mimikyu's gift. The top was an athletic top as well, with long sleeves. I slipped it on, and it matched the leggings. That made sense, it was super cold outside, and then there was a half jacket on top. For a winter style, it was okay. But it wouldn't be complete without a straw hat and Mimikyu's edition. Don't forget these. Mama called, and over the top of the changing room was held. Okay, fine. I called out. I couldn't argue that I liked them. Clunky boots. I grabbed them and spent a moment putting them on. They even had some cool buckles on the front. Once I was done, I checked myself in the mirror. I'll need some gloves to go with this one, I think. Otherwise, the long sleeve doesn't work. But I spun around, nodding, pleased at how the skirt whooshed a little, but still kept me modest. Then I imagined what I would look like with the final edition and nodded. This would do. Okay. I'm getting this one, but I need some gloves. I called out as I stepped out, and Mama clapped a little, while Gram nodded. Good. Cuckoo. Mimikyu cheered and leapt at me, and I spun around, giggling at his excitement. This'll be perfect. I told him, and he nodded happily. Gloves? I can see it. Alright. Mama said, and then pointed back into the changing room for me. I slumped and turned around. Time to get changed back and probably play through a dozen more outfits. Do you like it? I asked Mimikyu. We had stopped at the food court area of the Celadon department store, and Mimikyu was trying a bit of ice cream. The spoon had disappeared underneath the Pikachu costume, and then he had gone very, very still. Dash. The noise coming from him sounded almost like he was broken, and then he shivered and shook. Bit too much for you, huh? I asked, and he shook wildly and looked right up at me. Ah. It was really good then. I figured it out and got another small scoop. Once again, Mimikyu spazzed out as he ate it, and I giggled at his reaction. Pikachu. A tiny little voice called out, and Mimikyu and I stilled, because that had been directed at us. I looked over, and there was a little girl, a tiny little thing with a Pikachu doll, and she was pointing at Mimikyu. Pikachu. She called out, eyes wide, and I could feel Mimikyu tense on my lap. Nope. Mimikyu. I called out brightly, and that definitely confused the little girl. Pikachu? She asked, holding up her Pikachu doll. Yeah. But this is Mimikyu. See? I offered, hefting him up a bit and standing so I could crouch down and place him on my knees, letting her get a closer look. Mimikyu isn't a doll, he's a Pokemon. Pokemon? But he's a doll. She argued with me cutely, looking serious, and I smiled. Mimikyu, will you offer to shake her hand? I asked, and he nodded, startling the little girl as his hand slowly reached out of his disguise. She startled at its appearance, but I reached out and grabbed his hand and waved it around a little. See? Mimikyu is a Pokemon. And he's the nicest Pokemon ever. He's not good at making friends, because people think he's a little scary. Scary? She mumbled, but she hadn't run yet, and I smiled. Yep. See? People think he's scary, but he's not. He's super nice. She looked him over for a moment and nodded. Yep, cute. She agreed. And Mimikyu melted a little against me. Cuckoo? He spoke very, very gently, I noticed, and she blinked. Cuckoo? She repeated, and I couldn't help my giggle as Mimikyu just nodded regardless. She smiled and reached out a hand, and Mimikyu met her. A moment later, she had a weird look on her face as she felt the texture of his shadow claw. Weird. Hee hee. But not scary, right? No. He's like Merlot. She said, sort of slurring the name as she did. Marlowe? I asked, and she nodded. Papa's Nider King. He's big, and looks scary, but is nice. She said, and I smirked as I knew that was good enough. Mimikyu reached out, and suddenly the little girl was being hugged, and she looked surprised for a moment before smiling happily and patting Mimikyu on his back. This of course meant she touched his disguise, and she gasped. Soft. She cheered, and then Mimikyu was being spun around a bit unsteadily as she laughed and hugged him tightly. Heh, Mimikute, she declared, and I wasn't sure if she was calling him cute, or just hadn't understood the name, or was just incapable of saying it. Either way, it had my poor lonely boy's heart melt all the more, and he soon burst into tears. Wha? Crying? She asked, and then a moment later her own eyes started tearing up and she started crying before I could do anything to stop it. Millie. A woman called out, and suddenly I had no choice but to look apologetic as the little girl continued to squeeze Mimikyu tight as both of them cried into each other. The woman stalled as she realized that what her daughter was holding wasn't just a weird doll, but a Pokemon, so I stepped in. Okay Mimikyu, see me buddy. I spoke clearly, and while it took a bit of doing I got the two separated as the woman snatched up her daughter as Mimikyu switched to hugging and crying into my chest. That's a good boy. I comforted him as I gently rocked him. The girl slowly stopped crying as she looked from her mother to me with Mimikyu. Why cry? She asked, sniffling, and I smiled as I turned Mimikyu around so she could see him. It was happy tears. Mimikyu was so happy he cried. I told her, with a big smile, and her big brown eyes still full of tears blinked a bit before she smiled back. What is going on here? The woman asked, and I smiled apologetically to her. Sorry. Your daughter noticed my Mimikyu, and she thought he was a Pikachu, because he's wearing his Pikachu costume today. She said some very nice things to him, and he's a bit sensitive, so he started crying, and that got her crying. And I shrugged. What could you do? The woman nodded slowly, but she could see Mimikyu's shadow arms wrapped around me, and I could tell she was uncomfortable. Well, that's all right then. She offered and gave me a short bow before making sure Millie had her Pikachu doll, and then was walking away. Of course Mimikyu slumped, but then perked up as Millie started waving at him from around her mother's shoulder. Mimikyu waved back. Heh. That was nice. Maybe I'll need to put together a primer on Mimikyu? It was kind of nice to see Millie make friends with him. Want to finish the ice cream? I asked Mimikyu, who perked up. I ended up sitting in the back seat with Mimikyu as Mama drove us home instead of riding Arcanine. I had thought about leaving, but it was obvious Mama and Gram wanted to spend time with me. So instead, I told them all about my trip. And then Whitney tried to not give me the badge, and Bugsy went to talk with her. Whatever he said convinced her, and I got my star plane badge. Figures a Johto gym leader would act like that. Gram grumbled, and I just shook my head. Most of them were pretty nice, if a bit distant. Besides, Bugsy was cool. I still owe him another battle. Oh? You like this Johto boy? He's a bug nerd, just like I'm a Pokemon nerd. So our interests overlap a bit. I said, and then cocked my head as Gram gave me a big smirk from the front seat. Maybe you should have him come over sometime. I'd like to meet this Johto boy. Gram added, and I felt the confusion flow over my face before it struck me. EWWW. I squealed gross. Bugsy was just a kid. Don't be gross. I demanded, but that only made Gram break out into cackles, and even Mama was getting into it, giggling as she drove, and I just glared because how dare they? Now Vicky. We're just teasing. Mama offered. It's okay if you end up liking a Johto boy, she said, and then broke out into laughter at my horrified look on my face. Never. Boys were boys. I didn't need them. Gross. A note from Seras. Thank you for reading. Chapter 76. Katsu Hikamori. And done. He groaned as he stretched out. The lead up to the yearly conference was always a rush of activity. He looked up, and his office at this time of the year was a mess of memorabilia that had to be approved. Stall permits, building inspections, Pokemon Ranger requests to clear the roads and ensure that none of the wild Pokemon in the Silver Mountain Range would be close enough to the stadium to hear the battle and try to interfere. That had only happened once with a wild Tyranitar to change the way both regions prepared for the conference. Paperwork on paperwork, work on work. Boss. Holy Arceus, it's impossible. A voice called out and Katsu groaned. What is it, Hino? He demanded. The woman was an incredible video editor. She was meticulous, and had a bit of a reputation for her works on the yearly trainer battle videos. She was also. He looked up and took in her appearance. Her hair was a mess, her glasses were slightly askew, and it still hurt just to look at them. They were so thick. Her clothing was a mess, and if it wasn't for her being a total airhead, he might have asked if she wanted to go drink some nights. The fact he was her boss had stopped him, that and he had seen how clumsy she was even at the normal events, and getting soaked in cheap beer was a recurring issue for anyone sitting near her. What is it, Hino? SSS16. She stuttered, and he just stared at her until she would start making more sense. She seemed to realize after a minute that he had no idea what she meant, and continued. S16 star badges. She called out, and he frowned. That was incredibly low, impossibly low. Was this just the worst group of new trainers ever? That's it? He asked, rubbing at his chin. Is that still enough to make a full video? He asked. He needed to focus on the job. Get this stuff edited and in production to sell at the conference opening. And no. It's not that. There were lots of star badge victories. But. S16. She said again, and he just gave her another look. Please start being actually clear, Hino. I don't have time to try and figure out what you are hyper-focusing on today. Finally, she flopped a bunch of papers on his desk. He'd be cleaning that up later, he knew. And started rifling through it, before she grabbed one paper and nearly plastered it across his face. Taking it from her before she made him eat it, he looked it over. The last month's registry for star badges? He looked through it. Not seeing anything unusual until he got to the end. Victoria Ferrous, Zephyr Badge, Star, 11 of 28. Victoria Ferrous, High Badge, Star, 11 of 28. Victoria Ferrous, Fog Badge, Star, November 29th. And on it went. He felt his jaw dropping. One kid in less than a week had swept through every major Johto gym, including the Blackthorn. Tell me we have this girl's battles recorded, he demanded as he looked up and then took another paper Hino had found in her stack. He took it and looked through it. She wasn't always clear on what the issue was, but Hino had never come to him like this when it wasn't serious. Victoria Ferrous, again. She had fought Koga in Fuchsia too. Then he looked up and Hino had another paper. Suddenly he had a feeling. 16? He asked, and she stopped trying to shove the paper at him and nodded. All of them? All of them. The major gyms. Kanto and J Johto. You have the video? All of them that were recorded. Pull it. All of it. I need to make some calls. Hino. Get Fu in here, I need her advice. He demanded and grabbed for his phone. Who was he even supposed to call about this? There were methods for exceptional trainers. Sometimes great achievements would be added into the yearly trainer videos. Usually it was for those that had already passed their first year. Ace and elite trainers that had gone out and saved some ecological disaster. But this was something else. She was 10, this was her first year. They might have to reach out to the kids' parents, because it was very likely she'd be getting her own personal highlight video. He didn't know who Victoria Ferrous was, but she was about to be famous. And he knew. Good job. He called out to the woman that was creeping out of his office nervously. She jumped and yelped, dropping the papers she had collected from his desk, most probably his own paperwork, but Hino was like that. Ivy Vinewood. Okay, Ivy. You got this. You just have to get ready to stand in front of every person in Kanto and battle, and make a complete fool of yourself. She slumped, putting her head in her palms as she looked away from the mirror. She couldn't do this. What if she messed up? What if she fought Vicky in the first round? She cringed at the knowledge that it would be a short battle. Vicky was the one that originally gave her the idea for most of her tactics. And Vicky was a freak when it came to battling. Ivy? Are you ready? I don't know. She moaned out dejected. Looking up to see her mother looking sympathetic towards her. Ivy, dearest flower. You can do this. You don't have to worry. It's your first conference. No one is expecting you to win. You just have to compete, proving you grew on your journey, which you did. Her mother stepped in and pulled her into a hug that smelled like Venusaur's pollen. Ivy relaxed. It had always been a soothing scent. Besides, all of your friends will be there, including little Vicky, and you both went on a journey outside the region. No one else can hope to compare to that. Your new friends mean you are set for the competition. Mom. You know, most of them aren't ready for a battle like the conference. Phantom is still a baby. I think you'd be surprised, Flower. Phantom has taken to your training very well. Besides, not all of your Pokemon are babies. What about Fomantis? Fumi is progressing well. Ivy defended. Sure, she was very lazy, and getting the grass type to do anything during the day was a struggle. Not that she was going to tell her mother that. Admitted she was struggling with that one would be too embarrassing. Her mother, of course, seemed to just know, as she sent her a little smirk that Ivy refused to acknowledge. It was probably Venusaur tattling on her again. Are you finished getting ready? Her mom asked, a reminder that she didn't have time to sit here and stew. Not yet. Ivy admitted. There was one more place she had to visit before she left for the Indigo conference. The thought of it once more made her stomach queasy, but she got up and headed for her closet. She felt dread and swallowed it down as she opened it up. So? Hi, Sawaddle. She greeted and winced as the Pokemon started looking over her outfit with an eye to destroying it. But she had learned how to cut him off. Sawaddle, can I have my hat? She asked, and suddenly he was distracted, chirping happily as he jumped a few times and pulled down a cute little beret. Of course it had been green, but now it was covered in leaves. Sawaddle loved being involved with Ivy's outfits for the day, and he had slowly grown more used to not sewing leaves into everything. She took the hat and placed it on her head and smiled down at her Pokemon. How is it? So, Sawaddle. He cheered, bouncing around, and she relaxed. She had enough leaves in her outfit that he wasn't going to try and sew in more. Of course, she looked like some monotype trainer. Stupid Vicky. She could train other types. Look at Tauros. It looks cute, Ivy. Her mother said, and Ivy flushed a little as she stood up and let her see the outfit in full. I don't know if I'm ready. But I'm ready to try. Zealous Bia. Oh, how ethnic. Mother said as she looked out the window of the car. Zealous wanted to sigh at her mother's statement. It had been over a year since they moved to Kanto. Yet Mother still treated everything Cantonese as quaint and cute. Rather than just their culture. Zealous would never admit it, but she sorta liked the atmosphere that could be found here. Sure, Unova was just better, but people were nicer in crowds in Kanto, and festivals here were pretty fun. Oh, look, Zealous. They're selling cute little videos of the gym battles. Honey. We'll need to find out if our Zealous is in one. Huh. I'm sure she is. Rare Pokemon always attract attention, and our Zealous has a few Pokemon that aren't common here. Father said, smiling a bit from the passenger seat, but they drove past. Zealous wasn't sure she would be in one. Sure, her Pokemon were rare, but she had only fought in the minor gyms except for a few of the major ones early on. The yearly videos are usually sold in a few formats. The highlights will likely have at least one of Miss Bia's battles, because of her rare Pokemon. Mr. Highcase, their driver, said, and Zealous nodded. Mother would likely pick one up then. But Zealous ignored that for now and focused out the window. The smattering of stalls and shops set up off the road was a good visual distraction as she considered what was to come. All she had to do was do well, and Father had already agreed she could have her second-year journey back in Unova. Despite the difficulty of travel, it was all she wanted. Home. Kanto wasn't terrible. It had grown on her a bit. But it wasn't home. The styles were different, the people were different. The cheeseburgers weren't the same. She wondered how all of her old friends were doing. Some of them were still in contact sometimes, but the time zones meant they weren't talking a lot. and so they had drifted apart. The car moved through the traffic. Even at this early stage, the whole place was like a festival and people were everywhere. Zealous was thankful that father was important enough to have a room reserved because she had been told most of the hotels near the conference were booked years in advance, but they'd still be staying in a nice room that wasn't a bunkhouse. Idly she wondered how she'd do. She knew she could do well, she'd earned her badges without difficulty, and her Pokemon were well trained. And well fed. A deep breath in and out, and Zealous let out the frustration at her own mistakes. She had learned, been taught, and that was fine. That of course made her wonder how Victoria would do, and that made her glare out the window. That blonde farm girl was wrong. As a battler, it was just too overwhelming. Even in their training matches that she had convinced Zealous into, it had been worth it, despite the embarrassment. She had only managed to win against Victoria's new Pokemon. To only earn victory against baby Pokemon was... Well, she took a breath. Her team had improved. If there was one thing that Fluffhead was good at, it was acting as a whetstone. She might not win against her, but against any average trainer, she had a feeling she might put up a shockingly good fight. Kanto. She had to admit. While it was still a backwater, even worse than she had thought at first considering its rivalry with Johto kept the region locked into a rivalry that just weakened both regions. At least that was what her father said. It had grown on her. She knew she'd likely never return once she went back to Unova. Her Unovan journey would take another year, and Zealous knew she would want to take part in it a few times, doing as best she could. By the time she'd be satisfied, it was likely that father would be recalled to Unova and another ambassador would take his place, if it was decided it was needed. That's the thing. Kanto was such a backwater that Unova was still considering if an ambassador was even needed. Zealous sighed. She'd fight in this conference. Learn what she could, and do as best as she could, and then take it back to Unova to show up all the arrogant girls that thought Zealous wouldn't be ready for battle after being gone so long. Well, at least once this was over and she was back in Unova, she'd be the best again, and would never have to see an annoying farm girl with nothing but fluff in her head again. Come on, Vicky. We have to go. Papa called out, and I nodded at the call, grabbing the last of my stuff. I was in my new winter outfit, and it was time to head to the conference grounds. The battles weren't starting today, but the sign-up and the Moltres flame delivery would happen. Finally, I looked at my final piece. I ran my hands over it. Mimikyu had done an amazing job. It turned out Elizabeth had taken him to the craft store, and he had picked up all sorts of things with her help. I grabbed it and swung it over my shoulders. I had meant to use it as a joke to mess with Lance some more, but since the master had officially given the title, it might be taken as me copying Lance unironically, which was a shame. Capes weren't official dragon trainer clothing after all. It was because of Lance that later dragon trainers would wear them. I guess I was just getting in on the ground floor. The little hook that locked it in place connected, and I whipped my right hand down and it flared the cape. I definitely hadn't practiced that in the mirror a dozen times to get it right. The cape was a purplish blue, the color of dragon types. It was shorter than Lance's or Claire's cape. It only just covered my butt, but I think mine was definitely the best. Because mine had Milotic scales sewn into the collar. Not the prism scales, but the much larger tail scales, and it gave the collar a spiked appearance. It kinda reminded me of Zinnia from the games. Except her cape had dark scales around her collar. I wasn't sure why Mimikyu had chosen this style, even the color hadn't been something we discussed. He just made it. Maybe it was a Pokemon thing? I'd have to ask him sometime, but for now I gave my image in the mirror a heavy nod and turned, once more flaring the cape a bit as I headed out of the room. Of course, the moment I stepped outside to the flash of a camera, I turned around and pushed my face against the wall. "Noo!" I moaned in horror at everyone's looks. Gram was here too. "Vicky, you're about to stand in front of the entire region. If we embarrass you," Papa offered, but I shook my head. "It's because it's you." I moaned and then shook it off. Now wasn't the time. I spun, flaring my cape. "Dragon Master Vicky won't be stopped. To the conference. To victory." I demanded, pointing, and despite my face flushing red, I held the pose as Gram took pictures between her, cackling. Papa was laughing with her, but Mama was being supportive, or sarcastic, and was clapping. Faye should be a cat master. Gram grumbled at me. She hadn't stopped teasing me about it since we got confirmation from the Pokemon League. They had sent a little certificate confirming I had the title. Also, apparently it came with some responsibilities, but I was lucky. Since Lance was the champion and a dragon master, any issues with dragon types went through him first. Alright. Enough teasing and enough showing off. Papa said, first looking to Gram and then to me, but he was smiling. We have to leave or we'll be late. Faye. They will wait for a 16-star badge trainer. Gram grumbled, but I felt my smile go a little brittle. I knew it was going to come out no matter what I did, but it still felt weird knowing that I was about to become sort of famous, in the child prodigy way. At least Koga had treated me normally when I went to visit and tell him what happened in Johto. Stupid ninja traps. I had dodged the newly installed trapdoor that got me last time, but they got me with the psychic invisible wall. It didn't take me long to figure out that a Venomoth was doing it, but it was still embarrassing to keep walking into invisible walls. Koga. My nose still hurt. Shaking that off, I headed out the door, idly patting my pokeballs. I can't believe it was time. I can't believe it was happening. Come on, Vicky. Mama whispered into my ear as she pulled me into a hug from behind, a bit awkwardly with my cape. We're proud of you. No matter what happens. Win or lose in the first match, and we would never think less of you. I wouldn't. I grumbled, the idea that I would get beaten so quickly wasn't going to be allowed. But it was seriously unfair to hit me with the proud of you speech right now. It was impossible to resist something like that. Kiba. Huh. Come on. I made it into the conference. At least tell me you're proud of me. Of course I'm proud of you, brat. Now hurry up and get in the damn car. His mom yelled as he continued to dig through the piles of clothes in his room. Where was it? Kiba, I'm going to be proud of you upside your ass if you don't move. Hold on, you hag. I'm trying to find my jacket. You little shit, Kiba yelped as he was pulled right off his feet by the back of his collar. We are leaving. My jacket. You'll lose more than your jacket if you don't move your ass. She snapped back. Damn hag. How was he supposed to show off without his jacket? Might. My Taina came barreling past him and, damn it, that's my jacket. He roared as he kicked to try and chase after his mom's partner, but she didn't let him go. In the car, you brat. I'll get the damn jacket. Just another day in the Garu household. A note from Seras. Thank you all for reading. Chapter 77. Walking through the crowds of people made me incredibly nervous. I was getting looks, but nothing that made me think everyone knew who I was. But here we were. Pokemon League Village. The gathering place for all the trainers to rest during the league. I could even have a little bungalow house if I wanted to stay here during the competition. Oh look! Mama called out in delight and looked over and winced. The shops were already being put up along the road to the stadium, and there among piles of stuff was my face. I stilled for a moment and then walked over. The shop wasn't open yet, but there it was. A VHS cassette with my face on it, and images of my team. Star badge challenges, I read aloud, and then the year under it. But why was there two? There was the one with my face, and then another video with some other kids' faces on it just beside it. I wish the store was open. I'd buy one right now. Papa said happily, and I sank a bit into my cape. It's because of what I did, huh? I shook it off and instead turned away, unconsciously liking the way my cape flared behind me. Damn it. No wonder Lance started wearing the cape. It was cool. She's embarrassed. I heard Mama whisper to Papa behind me as I stalked off, and I just lowered my head and stalked faster. I wasn't. I was just playing it cool. Yeah. I hurried away even as Mama giggled at me. As I got closer and closer to the building where the registry would take place, I surprisingly calmed down. People made me anxious, but battles? Battles didn't worry me. I stopped before entering and turned. Go on, Vicky. You know what to do. We'll be in the stands. Papa said, and I nodded and turned one final time as I entered. Welcome. If you are here to register, please head to one of the attendants. A woman in a small business suit greeted me as I entered, and I nodded. There was quite a crowd already. Trainers crowded the room, and as I watched, they would speak to one of the attendants and then walk through a large side door. Today wasn't the first battles. Today was the lighting of the torch. Team Rocket better not pull their bullshit today. I vaguely remember them trying to steal the Multer's flame during the ceremony. I didn't see anyone I knew yet, so I walked over and got into line. The trainer ahead of me was probably in their late teens. And as I settled in, he turned to look at me, and then looked away, before jerking and giving me a much closer look. We stared at each other for a while. I was annoyed that I had to look up, but eventually, he opened his mouth. Aren't you the one on the front of that star badge video? I slumped. Yeah. I did a bunch of star battles. I said with a shrug, and that had the boy blink even wider. You earned star badges? Yeah? Don't you have one? I asked, and he shook his head instantly, which had me blinking. What? But shouldn't you have gotten one for your 8th badge? I did 4 of the smaller gyms to end my run this year. Star battles are rough. He offered and then looked at me, and I realized he was digging for information, but instead of answering, I just looked away. Great. I thought everyone would have at least 1 star badge, but what I had done was even weirder. How had I not known that? Pokemon TV had lied to me. Eventually, my silence had the boy look away, and soon I was offering my Pokemon ID to the attendant, and I was registered. Please head out through that door, to the stadium waiting area. The lighting of the flame ceremony will begin in an hour. She informed me with a smile, and I nodded. Following the guidance she gave me, I walked through the doors into a lounge area that was already packed with trainers. I was actually a little disappointed there were so few Pokemon out to pet that I ended up just finding a place against the wall and leaning against it. Time to wait. Richard Brushfire, Chief of Kanto Ecology for the League. Richard really wanted a smoke. He was in the VIP room overlooking the stadium, but unfortunately, there was a rule in place: no smoking was allowed inside. Apparently, since the glass was clear, children could see the important men inside smoking and think it was okay. President Goodsho's work, Richard had no doubt. For a man that smoked himself, he surely cared to keep the next generation from doing it. But he still wanted a smoke. He was overlooking the stadium from a comfortable seat. Somehow his status as a chief had allowed him access for this day. He didn't normally come to the conference. Happy to watch them at home with his feet up, but that hadn't been an option this year. Idly, he looked across the room to where Daniel Tsunada was surrounded by his posse of lickspills. Then he looked the other way and took in the sight of Jotun political members. The 10 or so men were on their own side of the room. The room that was usually conspicuously empty during the conference. He was surrounded on both sides, and despite being a Kanto patriot, he wasn't sure which side was more likely to stab him in the back. The fact Johto had even sent a delegation to watch over the Indigo conference, instead of just waiting for their turn to host, was telling. Especially since there wasn't any great Jotun trainer coming through trying to make waves. No, it was the opposite. A Kanto trainer had swept the entire Johto circuit in days, and had done so with a showing that had the entirety of Johto sitting up and taking notice. At least those in the government that would have heard about it. Damn it, good show, of course she'd be down in the crowd away from this mess, after asking him to come and keep an eye on things. At least the show today would be short. The actual conference started tomorrow, and that would be was that Lance. He blinked as the champion walked in through the door, and at his appearance a ripple ran through the room, as people turned to look at the champion, returned. Lance had been out of contact for weeks. Lance, my boy. A voice called out. The Silver League president, Goodshow's counterpart, President Elm. Lance greeted the old man, who looked pleased at his appearance. Of course he was. The champion being gone had made things a little tense. Come, boy. Come sit and join me. Tell me about your trip. I heard amazing rumors of a far forbidden land. Far yes, but it was hardly forbidden. In fact, the people of Mosway Town were interesting. Kind in their own way. Lance replied back as he took a seat the president offered him. Richard noted that Lance looked a little windswept, more than usual anyways. Had he arrived here straight from Kitakami? Richard sighed. He knew what he was going to have to do. Rising up, he brushed his pants of lint that wasn't there and walked over. Ignoring the quickly growing glares from the old Jotuns, who were all listening with an eager ear to Lance. Champion Lance. Nice to see you again. He offered a polite greeting, and Lance, to his relief, responded without malice. Richard Brushfire. To you as well. I wanted to thank you again for letting me come along before. Without the information I gained, I would have come from my latest trip emptier-handed than I would have liked. Then your trip to Kitakami was successful. I don't suppose you'd mind terribly if you shared what Pokemon you managed to bring back. As the chief ecologist of Kanto, I've had more work with Kitakami Pokemon than anyone besides a certain trainer. Of course. You'll be relieved to know that I didn't find any Mimikyu, so the researchers will go uninjured. Lance offered a joke that eased tensions, as despite Lance's agreement, the other men around him were glaring at him. That's more of a relief than you know. I didn't find anything that young Victoria didn't bring back, and less besides. Lance offered with a small sigh. I'll be happy to dash, Lance cut off as the noise from outside began. These hopeful competitors will battle one another as they strive always for excellence and victory. The intercom piping into the room spoke up, Richard having been ignoring it until then, as the crowd picked up into cheers. Excuse me, it seems the ceremony is beginning. Lance offered with a smile as he rose to his feet, his cape flaring as he walked out of the box. Probably to watch over the trainers as they entered the stadium. Soon the Moltres flame would be brought in, but first. Richard walked over to the large glass windows and looked down. The trainers started to enter. Most of them looked normal. The first-year trainers, they were small and looking around in awe. The next few years that looked eager for the coming battles, and the older trainers that looked serious. Dedicated. Those were the ones that had something to prove. And then there she was. The other headache of the hour. Victoria Ferrous entered the stadium, just like all the rest, although the fact she was wearing a cape made Richard want to roll his eyes. Yet, despite still being mostly unknown, that wouldn't last. The video sales would start after this ceremony. People would go buy this year's battle videos. By this evening, it would be on the news. And Richard was very, very glad that he was just an ecologist and not dealing with what would happen next. Ivy was gripping my hand super tight as we walked out of the shadows of the waiting rooms and into the stadium proper. Kiba was trying to act calm and collected, but he was freaking out too. He was walking all stiffly under the thousands of eyes looking down on us. Zealous was here too. She was in front of me, although she had refused to walk with us, specifically because of my tacky cape. I had of course told her my Mimikyu had made it, and she had gone all red as she realized she had made a faux pas and hadn't spoken to me since. It was hilarious. I looked up into the crowd of thousands of people. All of them here to see this year's battlers. To see where their friends or family stood. How many people up there had someone they knew down here? Cheering them on? We organized ourselves according to what we were told and waited. The ceremony began and I felt my eyes narrow as the girl carrying the Moltres flame came running in. Team Rocket had done some nonsense here, hadn't they? I looked around but didn't see any signs of trouble, so I relaxed. I sent a smile to Ivy, who returned it shakily and settled in to enjoy the moment. Which is when I finally spotted Ash. I narrowed my eyes, he was running up the steps after the torchbearer. Then I realized what was happening. There at the top were two figures standing in front of the flame pedestal. Damn it. My hands reached for a pokeball, but stopped. If I interfered, could I accidentally make the flame go out? I knew everything would be fine without interference, but my decision was taken from me. I watched as Jesse and James stole the torch, lit up the pedestal, and then disappeared before a massive grasshopper? It looked like a grasshopper. A giant robot appeared and stole the entire pedestal. Yet, at the same time there was motion and I relaxed. Before Jesse and James could even get moving. A Dragonite was there. Lance on its back. I could vaguely hear the screams of shock coming from inside the robot as Lance's Dragonite went to town, simply plowing through it and smashing the robot to pieces. Lance, having landed beside Ash, said something to the boy and I nodded. Everything was taken care of without me. I might be part of this world now, but that doesn't mean everything was on my shoulders. I watched as Team Rocket blasted off, and then Lance put the pedestal back with Dragonite's help. And the ceremony resumed. It was a shame though. My fingers itched to have thrown out my own Pokemon and taken part. Congratulations! I called out, drink raised above the table, and Kiba quickly joined me, grabbing his own drink and smashing it into mine, making a bit of a mess, but that was okay. Ivy was next, and even Zealous gave an irritated sigh before raising her glass and tapping ours. The night after the ceremony, we had all gone out to eat at the restaurants that gave free food for the contestants, and I had gathered everyone up to share the meal. I'm so excited. Aren't you excited? I asked, and Kiba nodded his head in a rush even as he was chowing down on some ribs. It's not that big a deal. Just a tiny little conference in Kanto. You should see the Unova conference. They are 10 times as big. Zealous argued, but I didn't call her on it, because honestly after the ceremony, she had been the most jittery of all of us. I think standing in front of such a large crowd had gotten to her. I'm just happy we all made it. Ivy offered, and I smiled happily at her as she started chowing down on her own meal. What, you think any of us from the Tauros Club wouldn't make it? Mrs. Kurosawa taught us well. I offered and then snickered as Zealous gave me a glare. She had never really gotten along with Tauros. Ugh, don't remind me. My parents want me to go back to school after my journey, Kiba said, and I looked at him in surprise. Really? Not going to take a few years? Nah, he said. To my surprise, he didn't sound down on himself, just confident. I like battling well enough, but it's not for me. I'll do as well as I can here in the conference, and that'll be good. I got all the badges. Giving up already? Zealous asked a little cruelly, but Kiba just barked out a laugh. Hell no. It's not giving up. I'll fight hard to score high here in the conference. Then I'll go to school and do all that bullshit and just get a job with my family, put my feet up and take it easy. Not all of us are like Vicky. Rude. I think I'll try again next year if I lose, but I'll be taking classes too. Ivy offered and Zealous scoffed, but I again looked at my friends in shock. But you're so talented. Battling isn't my thing, Vicky. With the Pokemon we found in Kitakami, I have some rare Pokemon to start breeding here in Kanto. So I'm going to be doing that if I can. So I need to take classes, and maybe study under a professor to learn how to best take care of my Pokemon. Wow. I muttered, looking around at the table and realizing that only Zealous was really planning on pushing through. And Zealous, you're going back to Unova, right? I asked, and she smiled and nodded, her nose to the sky. That's right. I'll have to travel and get my 8 badges in Unova, but with Ponyta I'll be able to travel to the gyms faster, and so I'll spend more time training my team next year. You taught me that. She said the last bit a bit blasely, but it was still heartfelt. Ah. Thanks, Alice. I'm going to miss you. Pfft. I'll see you again. If you lose before I face you during the conference, I'll still need to face you again to defeat you utterly. Don't think I'll let the fact you've beaten me stand. Says the girl challenging Vicky of all people. Are you going to challenge the champion of Unova too? Don't be stupid. Alder isn't some weakling like Lance. Alder is the greatest champion in the world. The champion of Unova. He sounds like a fun challenge. A new voice called out, and I blinked as I turned to see a voice I didn't expect. Hey Lance. Dragon Master Victoria. He greeted me then, while Zealous choked a bit on her words. Flying Master Lance. I greeted back instantly, and I delighted in the way Lance rolled his eyes at me. Vicky. Ivy kicked my shin, but it was worth it. I was hoping to speak to you for a moment, Victoria. Just call me Vicky, Lance. And sure. Grab a seat. I offered, and he seemed amused as his appearance had grabbed a lot of attention. Vicky, the hell did he mean by Dragon Master? Kiba whispered a bit too loud in my ear. Victoria was acknowledged with the title by the Elder of Blackthorn. Lance explained as he took a seat. I giggled as a nervous waiter came over and Lance just asked for water. Cool. Kiba offered and I threw him a thumbs up. Vicky. Thank you. Your advice was what I needed to form a bond with the Kamao. They allowed a young Jangmo to join me. That's great. We'll have to have our friends meet up. I bet they'll get a little homesick, so seeing some family will probably cheer them up. Ah. I believe that's a fine idea. He offered back, accepting the glass of water from the waiter and taking a sip. I didn't find any gummy in the mountain. I looked. That really sucks. I offered, actually disappointed for him. I wanted to see more gummy too. Indeed. Considering you are the only trainer with any gummy in all of Kanto. I was wondering what it would take to accept a trade. He offered and I blinked, took exactly half a second and spoke. Defeat me when I face you and I'll let you try to make a friend with one. I said instantly, and the entire table and room went suddenly quiet. Oh? Just that? That's right. I said. It was a win-win for me. Lance would go all out to defeat me if there was something on the line, and if Lance did find a gummy to partner up with, it meant I might get to see more cute Gudra someday. Win-win. Ha, ha ha ha. Lance broke out into baritone chuckles that surprised me, but the smile stretching across his face had my own grin growing to match it, and soon I was giggling and laughing alongside him. They're both crazy. Kiba whispered, but Lance and I both ignored him. This was more important. Thank you. Lance offered, still fighting off a smile. I'll be taking advantage of that offer. You won't be defeating me now. You think so? I look forward to forcing you to fight at your best and still wiping the floor with you. 'Cause your flying types are going to meet the ground. I added on and cackled at the way his smile turned into a grumpy look for all of a second. Must you with that joke again? Stop being a flying type trainer, and we'll talk. I replied back with a bit of teasing, and he blinked at me, in a way that had me cackling. He had just resisted rolling his eyes. A note from Seras. Thank you for reading. Chapter 78. The sun was rising. I stood out on the porch of the little bunk house they had given me, staring out over the quiet morning. Ivy and Kiba were still inside sleeping, but the sun had woken me right up. Today was the day. Today was the first day of the Indigo Conference. My first public battle. I'd be fighting in front of thousands of people, and basically everyone in Kanto would watch it on the TV if they couldn't come. Bliss? Blissey called out from inside and I turned around to see her coming out. I had released most of my team to get some sleep outside the pokeball, and it looks like Blissey was the first one to wake up. I glanced inside through the window and saw Arcanine still completely unconscious on her back as she snored away. I'm okay. Just thinking about what's coming next. I guess. Change is always scary, even if I'm not really scared of what's coming. I offered to her and she nodded, reaching over and patted me on the head. Bliss. Blissey. She offered and I couldn't help but smile at her comforting words. She patted her arm, telling me that we were strong. I know. I don't have any fear about the conference itself. It's what comes after. I took a breath and let it out. This was the Pokemon world. Not Earth. Being famous here wasn't quite as bad. Although Diantha had issues if I remember right. But she was also an actress and stuff. Blissey? She called to get my attention, and I looked over and she made a cute face as she stretched out her cheeks. Pfft. What? I gasped out in delight at the silly face as Blissey giggled along with me, and I nudged her with my shoulder as she still giggled at my reaction. Thanks, Blissey. We'll figure it out. Together. I added and she nodded happily at me. Then she reached down and touched her stomach. Hungry? Yeah, me too. Let's go see what food restaurants are open for trainers. Bliss. After a nice early breakfast, I went back and got dressed and then kicked Kiba out of bed so he'd actually get up, as Ivy had already started her day. Then the three of us gathered together to head towards the arena administration area. There were actually 5 different arenas to battle in, and the early matches would all take place in the 4 smaller arenas: rock, water, grass, and ice. For arenas that you had to battle in and win a match in each one, before you would have access to the main Indigo Stadium. I'm so nervous, Ivy whispered as we walked along the pretty paths down the streets towards the admin area. You'll be fine. We did some matches, and you know how to battle, I assured her, but she just gave me a look. Don't give me that. I've never managed to beat you in a real fight. That's because Vicky is a freak, and you shouldn't compare yourself to her. Kiba cut in and I instantly turned to glare at him, but it just slid off his shoulders. Kiba, that's mean. Ivy added. What? I'm right. She's the legendary trainer. I'm just hoping I don't end up facing her in any of the matches. I want to actually show off, you know? Like you have anything to show off for. Hey. I earned all the same badges as you. Just because Vicky didn't bring me to some distant region for rare Pokemon, doesn't mean I wasn't adding friends to my stable. He offered, and while the 2 of my friends bickered, I only felt my heart lighten. Kiba hadn't called them his Pokemon, or his team, or something like that. He had called them his friends. Kiba might be a little brat, but he was a good person. Kiba. I interrupted as Ivy was about to start grabbing Kiba's ear. What? I'm looking forward to seeing how much you've grown. I hope we get to face each other during the conference. That's sweet and everything, Vicky, but I really hope we don't. He offered back and I couldn't help but laugh at his tone, Ivy calming down and giggling as well. Huh? Oh hey. Ivy. It's Ivy. Over here. A voice started shouting and we all looked up. Oh. Ash. Hi. Ivy cheered back instantly, her face shifting to a happy smile, which made me snicker a bit. Ivy's little crush on Ash was still hilarious. Oh hey. Misty greeted as well, and gave me a nod, which I nodded back in turn with a wave. Huh? Who is this kid? Kiba asked, and I instantly had a sixth sense. I'm Ash Ketchum. He retorted back and then did something that made me want to crack up. He opened up his vest, showing off the 8 badges pinned inside. Kiba took one look at it, and then at the arrogant face Ash was making before making a noise of disgust. Everyone here has 8 badges, you dumbass. Kiba said bluntly, and then he looked over at Brock and blinked. Gym leader Brock? Who's the dumbass, dumbass? Ash snapped back, but Kiba was more interested in Brock. It was Kiba? Right? Yeah. That's right. Kiba said proudly, and I just watched along as Ash's temper got higher and higher. Anyways, we should get out of here, Ivy. We need to get our first matches. Kiba offered and made to move, but then only took a few steps when he noticed that Ivy wasn't following. No, Ivy was trying to calm down Ash. Don't mind Kiba, Ash, it's okay. I'm happy to see you got all your badges. She chirped happily, and the sudden look on Kiba's face shifted as he realized what it meant. I wonder if Ivy remembered that Kiba had a crush on her. Probably not, since she had gotten mad at me for telling her. I looked at the train wreck coming to a head and wished I had popcorn. That's a new outfit Misty offered me, and I turned my face to her without looking away as Kiba marched back. Yeah. It's my Dragon Master outfit, I explained, and while Misty and Brock both turned to me when I said that, I was still too focused on the drama unfolding. Hey. How do you know Ivy? Kiba demanded, pushing forward and up to Ash. Kiba, I noticed, was taller than Ash by a bit and tried to loom over the other boy. What's your deal? Ash snapped back right away. Ivy's a friend. What's it to you? Why don't you back dash? Hey. Ivy argued, jumping in and pushing Kiba back. Stop it. Why don't we have a battle right now then, huh, new boy? Kiba demanded and held up a pokeball, and Ash reached for his own. I took a long step back and Misty was quick to follow along with Brock trying to call out, but deciding to just follow my lead. Before either boy could get into it, the sound of a siren was beeped and Officer Jenny pulled up, using her bike's loudspeaker to be heard. Hey. No battles. Do I have to pull you in and make you miss your first day? She demanded, and both boys separated with a hurried backpedaling. Besides, I called out, getting their attention. Maybe you'll face each other in the tournament. I called out and laughed as they both looked to the other and nodded. I could practically see the lightning bolt shoot between the two boys' eyes. Well, I'm gonna go sign in, 'cause I want to find out who I'm battling. I called out as I walked past the boys and laughed as they both spun to chase after me. Turning around, I caught Misty and Ivy's eyes, and all three of us were smiling at the boys as Kiba and Ash took off. "Aw man," Brock whispered, and then broke into a jog to catch up. "Just press this button and your first battle arena and challenger will be chosen," the receptionist offered me, as the button in front of her lit up red. I nodded and just pressed it without hesitation, looking up as the little monitor did a cute little cycle until it landed on the water arena. Heh. My hand reached down for the pokeballs on my belt, and I rubbed my fingers across a certain ball. It was time. "Ah. I wanted to face you," Ash said from behind me, and I blinked as I looked back up at the face of the trainer that was just assigned to me. It wasn't someone I recognized, but the girl was older than me, and glaring at the picture. "Miranda Uchimaki will be your first competitor." "Thank you," I said to the receptionist before turning to Ash. "Keep winning, and eventually we'll face each other." I offered to Ash, but I had my doubts we would run into each other. "I mean, we could, I suppose." "You bet," he responded. "Pikachu and I won't lose this time." I just smiled at him, as I knew exactly how strong he was, but I also knew he wasn't at my level yet. But I looked at the clock. 3 p.m., huh? I muttered. I had a long day of waiting before it would be my turn. Guess I was going to be checking out the competition. "Mama," I greeted, happily, as I found my family in the arena and rushed over. "Hey, there she is." Papa greeted back, but Mama just held out her arms and I rushed in for a hug before sitting in the seat they had saved for me. "Anyone good so far?" I asked Graham, who just scoffed. "Not a single one has used a Meowth or Persian yet." "Disappointing," she offered back, and I noticed her side-eyeing me. "Sorry," I said cheerfully, which only made her scoff at me more. I looked over and noticed Ivy's family was pretty close by, but Ivy hadn't come up yet. Heh. She was still hanging out with Ash. I, on the other hand, reached out and got a smack on my hand as Mama loomed over me holding her popcorn that I had just tried to swipe a few from away from. "Please?" I asked, and Mama went from angry goddess to a gentle smile and tucked the popcorn in my lap. "Nice." I looked on and smiled as the next battle began, a Blastoise going up against a Magneton. Ouch, but this could be super interesting. Pokemon battles. Big official battles that I was actually spectating. This was so exciting. Victory for Ash Ketchum. The announcer called out and I called out some cheers, but it was pointless. Ivy was on her feet and cheering loud enough for everyone in our section. Heh. I doubt he even heard her though, because the arena was excited. Ash had an evolution mid-battle. That was always exciting. His Kingler was so cute too. But I rose up and looked at Mama and Papa. "I'm going to get ready." "Good luck, Trouble." "Beat them up, Vicky," Mama added firmly, and I smiled at how bloodthirsty she sounded. "That's right. Go show them what a Ferrous can do." Graham added, and I nodded, took a deep breath and headed out. Cape fluttering behind me. I went down into the waiting room where plenty of nervous trainers were hanging out, and walked over to the screen that had the times for battles. I still had some time. So I pulled up the Pokeball that was going to start and finish this battle. "This is it. We're going all out from the start, okay? Together," I whispered, and I could feel the ball shake in my grip. As always, they were hungry to make that agreement reality. And now the start of the 5th battle on the water field. The announcer called out. And I was ready. This was it. On the red side, a returning challenger, Miranda Uchimaki, of Celadon City. This is Miranda's 4th appearance in the conference, and we are all looking forward to seeing how far she goes this time. The announcer called out, and I watched as my opponent headed out of the dark entrance on the other side of the arena and up the small platform. She waved at the crowd that cheered her appearance. And on the green side, a first-year trainer, Victoria Ferrous of Viridian City. An Dragon Master? The announcer actually sounded confused as he read it off, and the crowd went from cheering to a wave of confusion running throughout. I couldn't make out any single murmur from the crowd, too many voices all speaking at once, but I knew what they were saying. Kanto had a Dragon Master? Since when? I stepped out of the darkened corridor and onto the field, and didn't hesitate to use my skills I had practiced over the last few days. The wind, and a shifting hand, caused my cape to flap in the wind behind me as I walked, and I stood proud. The confusion of the crowd ended quickly as people cheered regardless, but it wasn't quite as loud as it had been just before. That was okay. I stepped up onto my platform and locked eyes with my opponent. She looked confused, but there was a sneer across her face regardless. Now, let the fifth battle of the water field begin. The announcer called, and from that point on, I zoned him out, grabbing a pokeball in my hand and feeling the eager rumble within. This is your time to shine. Go. My blue heart. Miranda Uchimaki. A first-year trainer? An easy win. That was her decision as she stood on the podium and heard the announcer call out Victoria Ferrous. Then everything went sideways. Dragon Master? The hell? Was she one of those weirdo trainers that made up titles for themselves? Kanto didn't have any Dragon Masters. She shook it off. It didn't matter. Head games, or truth, Miranda had experience on her side. This wasn't her first conference, and she wouldn't lose. Miranda's fist clenched as she considered this conference. It was time. She couldn't lose this time. She had trained hard the entire year despite school, and everything else pulling her away. This was the year she was going to win it all. The girl stepped out and walked casually across the arena without a single hint of worry. This tiny slip of a girl, a first year, was her opponent? She almost felt bad. She remembered being in that position. Her first year. She had faced someone else new at first, gotten lucky, and won moving on, but had lost right after against that asshole that had won the entire conference. It happened sometimes, but this time it would be this girl in her shoes. She wouldn't go easy on her though. This was too important for any feelings to interfere. The girl arrived and their eyes locked. This caused the girl to break out into a smile that was all teeth. Huh. She had some fight in her. Maybe a bit too much confidence though. Miranda was going to pop that right now. Now. Let the fifth battle of the water field begin. And Miranda threw out her Pokemon. The best Pokemon to start this battle off with. Unlike this newbie, she knew exactly how this water arena would go. Dugong. Her beauty called out, and she smirked as she got plenty of happy gasps of delight from the arena. Dugong were pretty after all. This is your time to shine. Go. My blue heart. And Miranda wondered what cutesy Pokemon would be called. The holy shit, that's a Gyarados. She stumbled back as the Gyarados rose out of the water and roared and the arena quivered. Dugong instantly jumped into the water to hide and Miranda shivered. Gyarados. This wasn't the first time she'd seen some new trainer show up with such a powerful Pokemon, and every time they were uncontrollable beasts. Sure, sometimes they won their matches, but eventually, the Pokemon would lose control. Miranda looked up at the announcer, but there was no call from the announcer about stopping the match, and the Gyarados shifted from roaring to looking down at the water where Beauty was hiding. Beauty. Ice. She called out and winced as the Arctic wind suddenly picked up as a blizzard roared in, and suddenly the water started icing up. Okay. Focus, Miranda. You can beat an uncontrollable Gyarados. Your next choice was perfect for it if Beauty couldn't handle it. Blue heart. Prepare. She called out, and to Miranda's shock, and the gasps of the audience, the Gyarados didn't start rampaging, but instead began twisting and shifting. What was that? Then to her surprise, the answer happened. A fat plop of a raindrop slapped into her nose. High above. The sky suddenly filled in, clouds growing, turning the blue sky gray. Miranda shook it off. A water-type buff wouldn't help. Beauty. Miranda called, and her Pokemon knew what to do. Ice continued to grow, but then it suddenly surged forward avalanche using the already created ice. Miranda smirked as the Gyarados was pushed back, and it roared in anger, but then the girl spoke. Blue heart. Together. She called and the Gyarados looked back for a moment, the girl's fist surged down, and Gyarados followed the movement. Blasting water high into the sky that started freezing as the blizzard her beauty was using to try and freeze the water for her next Pokemon. Going into the water to hide? That won't work. Miranda called out, feeling confident as the Gyarados had taken a hit already. The girl though just smiled, her lips spreading into a look of teeth and hunger. A look that promised something Miranda wasn't sure she liked. Now. Blue heart. Take your place. Show them all where you belong. And the girl's fist that had been pointed down blasted into the air above her head, a finger pointing upwards, and Miranda screamed as everything suddenly exploded. Freezing water smashed over her, and she had to grip onto the railing to keep from falling over. Ice chunks smashed around, and she quivered as she realized that the ice layer she had been building up had been completely smashed to nothing. But then, slowly as things calmed down, she wiped water out of her eyes and looked at the arena. Beauty was there. But where was the Gyarados? What? She asked looking around, but it wasn't until she noticed Beauty looking up that it registered. The crowd was dead silent, all looking straight up as well, and slowly Miranda raised her head. That was impossible. No way. That couldn't be. There were things in life that were the way they were. Things that swam. Things that walked. And things that shouldn't ever be in the sky, shouldn't be in the sky. Conquer it all. Claim your place. What can stand against you who defied fate? Blue heart. What's the sky but an endless ocean? One that belongs to you. The girl roared out, and her Pokemon roared in time, and then she started laughing. The girl laughed like a madwoman, feral endless laughter. Out from the gray clouds above, the length of a Gyarados could be seen, flowing into and out of the bottom of the clouds. When had the sky become an ocean? It was such a stupid thought, but Miranda couldn't help but think it, especially as the twisting coils would sometimes shift and reveal a Gyarados looking down on them all. Flying. Gyarados? She spoke, and it was about that time the announcer speakers suddenly crackled on. Folks. I can't believe it, but it looks like Trainer Victoria's Gyarados is flying. Let's all be calm, this is not a time to panic. No. Miranda thought right now was absolutely the time to start panicking. A note from Seras. Thank you for reading. Chapter 79. A note from Seras. Kept you waiting, huh? Electabuzz. Thundershock. My opponent screamed, but it was too late for that. Gyarados had been sweeping the girl's team, and now her last Pokemon was desperately sending out blasts of electricity into the clouds. The lightning hit the clouds above, and just splattered into them. To my delight, rain clouds were pretty good shields against electricity-based attacks. I'm sure if the Electabuzz was stronger, like Ash's Pikachu, my blue heart would be in more trouble, but that wasn't the case. But it was time to end this once and for all. I laughed and raised my fists to the sky, to get my blue heart's attention. Your power is burning hot. Now. Grasp victory. I roared, and I couldn't help but break into cackles as the clouds above suddenly shifted. Darkness lit up only from the faint sunlight still soaking through, suddenly brightening. The crowd went silent, as a line of power ran through the clouds rapidly, my blue heart's long body gathering power, and then he stuck his head down, his eyes already glowing white with his burning hot strength. That's right, blue heart. You're a Shounen character. Let it roar. Hyper beam. I called in time with the release of the orb of power in his mouth, the light burning through the darkness, the clouds unable to hide this light that was more powerful than the sun. And Electabuzz tried. He raised his fists, and Miranda called out. Thunder punch. And crackling energy gathered, and he thrust as the beam came down on him, but it was like punching a waterfall. Heh. The ice he was standing on was shattered, and Electabuzz disappeared. That was the match. I stayed on guard, but there was no way that Pokemon was going to get back up for another round. And that is Miranda Uchamaki's last Pokemon, Electabuzz out. The announcer called out, as Electabuzz appeared floating face up unconscious in the water. A moment later he was returned, and then it was over. The winner is Victoria Ferrous. I noticed rapidly that the crowd wasn't cheering me on, instead their eyes were still all high as Growlithe had disappeared into the clouds. Ah. He was being shy because he was tired after Hyper Beam. I took a step back, and then ran forward, leaping over the edge of the trainer podium, landing with a plop in the soaked grass as I stepped forward until I hit the edge of the pool. And then I looked up and spread my arms. And the roar that echoed over the stadium was heard as Growlithe didn't just poke his head out of the clouds, but came charging out at full speed, banishing the clouds that he had hidden within. Hugs! I called out loudly, and that was everything he needed. A moment later he smashed into the icy pool, a plume of water and ice rushing out, soaking me completely as it washed over me. It would have pulled me right off my feet if not for the face that suddenly was in front of me that I grabbed onto. And then the water rushed away, leaving me leaning into Blue Heart's face. For a moment it was just us. You were amazing, I told him, and he rumbled deep in his throat, a quiet purr that only I ever got to hear. The noise of heavy splashes echoed around, as his tail swished back and forth and smashed into the pool in happiness. It was just the two of us. Happiness curled around us both. I looked away from him to see the crowd, as cheers had started, sporadic as they were, as people were still obviously freaking out at my breaking of their entire worldview. So, did I deal with that, or run away? Let's fly. I called out instantly as the decision took exactly a millisecond to decide on, and I leapt up onto Blue Heart's horn, stabilizing myself as I spun and flared my very damp cape behind me, as suddenly there was a surge below and Blue Heart rocketed up into the sky once more. Yeah, this was the best choice. Let everyone calm down and not answer dozens of questions or something, instead just a peaceful flight slowly circling above the arenas. Any issues this might cause were future Vicky's problem. Damn it, past Vicky. I grumbled. I hadn't even sat down in front of the Pokemon Center when I was attacked. Victoria Ferrous. Fudge, that's the cops. Gyarados didn't curve off and take us on a life of crime, instead settling down with a rumble, and I jumped off to stare up at Papa's stern face. I didn't do it. You can't prove it in a court of law. I demand my lawyer. Denied. Mama said from behind Papa, and I noticed she was very specifically hiding away. I felt my amusement sour a bit, and I turned. Good job, my Blue Heart. Take a rest, okay? I asked, and he rumbled and bent down to rub me with his face as he disappeared. Vicky. You look cold. I'm freezing. I agreed. Getting soaked and then going on a flying Gyarados ride hadn't exactly left me warm. This mountain was freezing. Come on, let's get you inside and warmed up, a lot of people want to talk to you. Papa demanded, and dragged me into the Pokemon Center. After a few minutes of letting me get changed into something warm, I was dragged out of the Pokemon Center and into a car. What's going on? The entire league is freaking out trouble, Papa said, and he gave me a look. Someone revealed that Gyarados can fly in front of the entire region. People aren't reacting well. I didn't have any words to share. People would get used to it, most Gyarados probably couldn't fly. And I wasn't going to hide my friend just because people wanted. So what were we even doing here? But instead I remained silent as we drove up to the league office building. The same place I had been registered before. Oh, Vicky. Papa said, seemingly remembering something. I looked up to meet his warm eyes. I'm proud of you. For winning. Good job. He said. It came out a bit awkwardly, as he must have realized that he had rushed to the problem at hand, without it. I threw him a bright smile and a thumbs up. I'm the best after all. Trouble. Mama said, with a wink and a warm side hug. So that was nice. Man, past Vicky really screwed me over here. What was that? I was pointedly asked, and I looked away. Nothing. Miss Ferrous. The man's voice sounded so done with everything. What do you want me to say? Blue Heart can fly, he's a flying type. That's not news. Lance uses Gyarados, I said, throwing the man under the bus for being a flying type trainer again. Gyarados don't fly. Richard Brushfire called out from across the room. The man had been on the phone since I entered, only repeating that whenever it was sort of brought up. Miss Ferrous, can you explain to me, how? President Goodshow asked, his big beard and kind eyes a bit pointed. I think that's a bit too far. I looked over at Graham, who was glaring at the old man. Asking for family secrets? She added with a buffet. I smiled at her. She had been in the room waiting when we got here, fending off the League men. This may constitute the first time in a long time that the Pokemon Association has to demand information for the good of the region. President Goodshow said seriously, and even Graham looked away at his words. I sighed. I had expected a reaction to Blue Heart, and even a bit of fear, but not to the extent that I was seeing. I think Cigarette Guy was going to have a heart attack with how fast he was talking on the phone. The voice that interrupted broke down some of the tension. I wouldn't mind trading for the information if that would suit the issue. Lance offered, and I looked over to him, and my lips curled into a smirk. Flying Tide Dash. Don't say it. He responded instantly without even looking at me, just a pointed finger as he looked at Graham, Mama, and Papa. Uncle Leo, to my surprise, was here too. Although Elizabeth hadn't been brought in. He had been quiet so far, but he perked up at that offer. Nah, I denied, in turn earning everyone's attention at my sudden denial. I interrupted everyone's attempt to argue with me though. It's so simple, making you pay for it would be a rip-off. I'm surprised you never tried it. You just have to have your Magikarp leap over the Dragon's Gate. I explained with a little hand gesture showing the action. My words caused a commotion as Lance and I continued to lock eyes. There was denial and arguments from some of the researchers that were in the wings, but it was Lance that nodded. I see. That makes sense. How? Richard whispered a bit too loud, and I wasn't alone in sending him a look that silenced him. I can't say for certain with my limited sample size, but from my Blue Heart, I think it's not just the jump that does it. I admitted, and that caught everyone's attention. My Magikarp evolved at the moment of glory. There was no danger or fear. He evolved with his heart full of happiness. Maybe his heart, so full of happiness, was lighter than his mind full of rage. So he was able to fly? I shrugged at the end, because that was just what I thought about it. Lance nodded along, taking my words to heart, but it was the researchers around the room that interrupted. That makes no sense. Perhaps it requires a certain speed to unlock the flight? He asked a bit loudly to his partner, and he nodded as well. Lance, I noticed, frowned and turned, but I just shrugged. Whatever, if they didn't want to believe me, that was their problem. So what I am gathering is that this isn't something the region has to worry about happening in the wild. Goodshow asked, and I actually shrugged at that. Probably not, but it's not impossible. A Magikarp that decided to climb a waterfall is always possible. Not likely, but possible. Or it could be done naturally in other ways. Like I said, my sample size is too small, but Blue Heart does have a much calmer demeanor than normal Gyarados, so even if it did happen more often, it's probably okay. I looked over the group that was looking at me in surprise. Huh. That's a bit more detail than I expect from a 10-year-old. One of the researchers in the room muttered, but I caught it. I'm almost 11. I replied, only proving that I was still 10 in the eyes of everyone in the room, of course. Your Gyarados is calmer? Lance asked, ignoring the interplay throughout the room. Yep. Blue Heart is a sweetheart. He lets the others play around or on him. I can mush up his face, and he just likes the attention. He doesn't really get angry unless something attacks me. I'll definitely have to try this myself. My Gyarados is due to lay some eggs, I suppose. Be careful. They'll need a lot of support during the training. It's easy for a Magikarp to lose heart, and if you aren't there to bring them back, you might end up hurting them more than helping. I'll keep that in mind, Victoria. Lance says seriously, and I threw a thumbs up in response. Lance got it. Even if he was a flying-type trainer. I think that's good enough then. President Goodshow said, taking off his ball cap to rub at his mostly bald head for a moment. Miss Ferrous, thank you so much for taking the time to let us gather some information about this situation. I know that all you want to do is celebrate your victory. So let me be one of the first. I saw your battle, and it was astounding. I look forward to the rest of the conference. Thanks. I chirped, then looked around and leaned over to Papa. That means we can leave, right? Yes. Let's go. I want to make sure you get some food in you, and some rest for your match tomorrow. Papa said firmly, and I happily jumped off the chair I had been sitting in and rushed to the door. Time to get some food, for me and my team. Richard Brushfire. I'm not the only one trying to make sense of what she said, right? He asked, only once the family was out of the room. It made sense. Lance spoke up firmly, his eyes on the door for a moment longer as if still taking in the young girl, but then he turned, and the persona of the champion fell over him. But only if you adhere to some old methodology. One that the Blackthorn still likes to espouse, although it has fallen out of favor. Bond empowerment? Richard asked, and Lance nodded. Indeed, the master speaks of such things, and from what I was told by Claire, that's what earned Victoria her title of Dragon Master. Richard added, but didn't speak as the researchers around him were more than willing to speak against the champion's grandfather. That makes no sense? Bond empowerment has been mostly disproven over the years. One of the men spoke up and Lance turned to him. Is that so? Yes. A Pokemon's happiness of course improves their rate of advancement, but the idea that a human and Pokemon working together increases their strength has never been. It doesn't really matter. Lance spoke to Richard's surprise. Because the fact is, that girl believes it, and frankly, does anyone in this room, besides me, believe they could even slow her down in a fight if it came to it? She seems to be doing something right. He offered at the end, and the researcher frowned. That doesn't prove anything. The man said below his breath. Lance. Richard spoke, cutting in. Moving on to the only topic that matters. Is there any worry about this from the Lake of Rage? None. I believe Victoria was speaking truthfully. In order to unlock the natural talent to fly, in Gyarados, they may need more than what a wild Magikarp is likely to find. I would assume that you will find more trainers seeking out Magikarp in the next year though. Ugh, don't remind me. Richard groaned, thankful he wasn't part of the Rangers. That was going to be a mess. Every time some trainer ran through the conference with a powerful Gyarados, there was a rash of Gyarados attacks the next year. Either captured Magikarp evolving and going wild, or the young trainers going into Gyarados territory to try and capture a Magikarp, or the Gyarados themselves. I think that perhaps young Victoria has the start of something interesting. Change, gentlemen, I find over my years usually comes at the end of a Pokemon battle, when a young trainer breaks what we all thought of as possible. Good, Joe added with a smile. And there can be no doubt, that has happened today. That's the Gyarados girl. The one that flew? Whoa, do you think she'd tell us how to get it to fly? Don't be stupid, that's a family secret, and I don't want more flying Gyarados. I ignored the comments as we walked through the conference town. I was getting plenty of attention, but honestly I was more interested in my family. Papa and Uncle Leo were very pointedly not speaking to each other, but both were speaking despite that. You should be more careful about handing out information like that. Uncle Leo was arguing. Leave her alone, Leo. Gram cut in. The girl's got a sixth sense for this sort of thing. Flying Gyarados, huh? She asked, and I blinked at the question. Yeah? I mean, Gyarados is a flying type. And look at Milotic, he can sort of hover, but I've never seen a Gyarados do that, so I figured you just needed to teach them to fly. They're a flying type, and flying types can fly. I mean, that's like common sense. Common sense. Faye. Gram scoffed and then cackled. Granddaughter, I think your sense is anything but common. She continued to cackle, but I wasn't laughing with her. Yeah. I know. There were way too many times I've run into people that just don't treat Pokemon right. It was times like this that made me really miss Oak. It would be so much easier if I didn't feel sort of guilty for knowing so much stuff that no one else knew. I guess I wasn't being the trainer that Oak thought I was a Pokédex holder after all. How many times had Oak handed me a Pokédex and a Pokémon and sent me out into the world of Pokémon? Well, in the games anyways, but it still counts. We stopped to get food, but everyone must have noticed I was being introspective as the chatter mostly went around me. I had tinkered with my Pokédex, I still had it in my bag. Something I doodled on every once in a while when I couldn't sleep in my tent. But it's not like I could just throw it at someone and expect it to work. The problem was it was hard to verify knowledge. I needed a way to spread it without actually caring about going through researchers. 'Cause those guys were all about the scientific method, but they lived in a world with magic. I looked away from the table at the people that were peeking at me. I had made a bit of a scene after all. I guess Oak had used his battling prowess to get his research taken seriously, but I wasn't. I couldn't do what Oak did. I'd have to come up with my own way. Woo! Go Ivy! I cheered from the stands as Ivy battled. Venusaur had been her first pick, and the battle started. The opponent's Rapidash, a solid choice, but even as it charged forward in a flame wheel, it slammed into Venusaur, who simply poofed into a poke doll that then vanished. What? The opponent asked in shock as the massive Venusaur disappeared. But then as the smoke cleared, there she was. Venusaur's flower was pointed, and instantly a burst of pollen exploded out. She got him! I called out as Rapidash suddenly whinnied and then flopped. Well, that meant Ivy likely won this. Ivy didn't call out anything, but I could see Venusaur suddenly start using moves. First, the sky above suddenly got bright, and I could practically see the streamers of sunlight raining down. Sunny day? Against a fire type was risky, but I had faith. Then Venusaur shifted and a purple glob of gunk shot out and splattered across Rapidash. Toxic, huh? Nasty Ivy. Really nasty. Rapidash. Wake up. I nodded, that was likely to work, it had been long enough, and suddenly it did. Rapidash jumped to its feet looking pissed as it started burning bright with fire, probably to protect itself. Flare Blitz. The opponent called out, and I felt my eyes widen as the Rapidash burst into a practically straight line of fire as it raced right at Venusaur. To my surprise, Ivy didn't need to say anything. A moment later, the Rapidash slammed into a solid wall and I couldn't help but nod. And Venusaur uses Protect, completely negating the attack. The announcer called out, and I smirked as the grass terrain was looking pretty rough from that attack, but Venusaur stared down the fire type without concern. Ivy Vinewood's Venusaur is a tough customer. Rapidash was in a bad spot, and Ivy capitalized. Bulldoze! She called out, and Rapidash tried to leap away, but the ground attack was timed correctly. And the Rapidash stumbled, obviously twisting its ankle a bit as it was slammed by the moving ground. That was the first match in Ivy's favor. Rapidash tried to regain some control, but only managed some minor damage on Venusaur, which was healed away. And as Rapidash pulled away, I noticed Ivy being sneaky. Venusaur kept fading away with Substitute. Between its healing and Venusaur's move pool, which was super broad, she tore into her enemy. Eventually Venusaur went down to a surprise flamethrower by a Night Arena, and was swapped out with Tauros, to remove the type weakness. Watching that poor Night Arena fly into the sky from a very familiar move. That was a Mrs. Kurosawa variant on Giga Impact, and Seismic Toss, the match was over. Woo! I cheered and Ivy turned to the crowd that was cheering her on. Despite this being her second match, she seemed flustered and waved. Heh. Ivy might not have been as flashy as I was, but the Vinewoods were pretty famous, and the announcer had introduced her as one of the Vinewood Bulbasaur breeders. Quite a few people in this crowd probably had, or knew someone that had a Bulbasaur coming from Ivy's family. But this wasn't a moment where Ivy was recognized because of her family, it was a moment where her family was recognized because of Ivy. A note from Seras. Thank you for reading. Hiatus is still pretty much ongoing. I'm really appreciating my break from Gitsy at the moment. I needed the time away. Look forward to a new release in a few weeks as I'm working on my first big release of an original setting story, Chapter 80. And the overwhelming might of Victoria Ferrous is still on display. The announcer called out, as I watched my opponent recall their Nidoking. It had been a good try, but my opponent's Nidoking wasn't anywhere near the old man from Palette's King. Will Victoria Ferrous recall her Arcanine after that mighty clash? It doesn't seem so. Another round with the legendary Arcanine. The challenger threw out a Pokeball eventually, and I grinned. I see. Nidoking, and a Blastoise. This girl was a fan of chunky boys. Blastoise. She called out, without giving an order, and I smirked as it shifted to aim its pumps right at Arcanine. Arcanine. Don't get wet. I called out, less because I didn't want to get her hit, and more because she smelled like wet dog when she got soaked. She juked, and then burst rapid fire in a rush as the hydro pump roared out, and smashed into the rock arena. Unfortunately, the rock arena didn't slow Arcanine down, like my opponent had probably hoped. She was in fact loving the uneven terrain as she dashed around, leaping off rocks, back and forth in a blur of flame and speed. Over and over the Blastoise fired, while Arcanine kept moving. Rocks smashed away at the pure power of the water type, but it was all for naught. Blastoise. Air burst. My opponent called out and I blinked at the odd name, but I watched and felt my grin grow wide as Blastoise stopped aiming at the ground and instead pointing his nozzles straight up. Blaast. He roared out, and it wasn't a pump of power, but like a pressured ball of water that blasted into the air with the power of a mortar. Then while in the air, it exploded. Suddenly water dropped onto the arena, less like a rain, and more like a wave. Counter shield. I roared out loudly, because I had to just to be heard over the noise of rushing water. Arcanine suddenly stopped running and started spinning like a dog chasing her tail, and then between 1 second and another, like the friction was needed, fire erupted out from her coat. The wave of fire that exploded out smashed into water, and while it would definitely lose over time, this wasn't a constant attack. The water that fell down was burned away as the entire arena started heating up. Arcanine still had a long way to go to get her special attack up to her physical attack, but we had trained hard with this fiery counter shield just in case. Now. Go. I roared, and out of the ball of flame that pulsed on top of the rock, a line of fire straight from the flame and into the chest of Blastoise burst out. Arcanine appeared, her head shining like steel as she smashed head first into Blastoise's stomach. I nodded. The battle wasn't actually over yet. The Blastoise blasted water guns to try and fend Arcanine off, but the trainer was shaken, and she wasn't doing well in getting a plan together. Not long after, Blastoise went down from another flaming streak across the arena. Arcanine's tail was up in the air, showing her eagerness for the next battle. I smiled as I waited for the next Pokemon. Miss Ferrous. A voice called out as I left the arena, second win in my pocket. I blinked as I was just walking out of the overhang when I was called, and I turned and pointed at me, because the sight that reached me wasn't something I was really comfortable with. A reporter and a cameraman. Shit. Miss Ferrous. CPN Kanto News. Miss Ferrous, video of a flying Gyarados is spreading like wildfire across all of Kanto. Tell us, will we start seeing more Gyarados flying? How did you pull off such a feat? I stalled because. Camera. But then I blinked and shrugged. Fuck it. Probably not. It takes a lot of training and love to get a Gyarados to connect with their inner flying type and claim the sky. I said, with a shrug. And I don't want to confirm how I got my blue heart to fly, because I only have one example. Give it a bit, and we'll see if it's replicable, and if it is, I'm sure the knowledge will get released to the people. Are you confirming that you'll release that secret to the world? She asked again, throwing the mic in my face. It's not really a secret. I told Lance yesterday, and he said he's going to try it himself. Champion Lance? Are you in communication with him often? Can we get information on your connection to the Blackthorn clan, and comment that they gave you the title of Dragon Master through nepotism? You. Not often? I got pulled into a meeting yesterday after my flight with Blue Heart, and he was there. And I only went to Blackthorn City on my journey. The Elder's a good man. We talked before my battle with Claire, and he gave me the title. He believed I earned it. Is it true, you went through the entire Johto region's gyms in only a few days? She asked again. Man, it's a good thing I remember smartphone cameras, and YouTube. Otherwise, I might get annoyed with being recorded. Yeah, I traveled to Johto to get some training for a new Pokemon I was adding to my team for the conference. She needed some training in fighting in Pokemon battles with people. She did really well, and then I earned all the star badges from the Johto gyms. It was fun, and I made some new friends. New friends? How was your treatment in Johto? A Kanto trainer doing what you did must have caused some ruffled feathers. She urged on, probably looking for some drama? But I just shrugged. It was okay. Everyone battled me without too much issue, and Bugsy even traveled with me after I won his badge, and we became good friends. He's going to do some training, and we are going to have another battle as well. So I'm looking forward to that. Oh. Bugsy from Azalea Town? You had a good relationship with him? She asked, and I narrowed my eyes at the woman with her stupid shining fake smile and just brushed it off. Anyway, I'm going to get going. I have some friends battling soon. Wait, Miss Ferrous, one more question. Sorry, I need to go. Bye. I called out, as I released my secret weapon. Arcanine perked up as she realized we weren't just at the Pokemon Center. I climbed on board without hesitation, and then we were gone in a burst of speed. She had just soloed an entire team, but Arcanine always had more energy. Thanks for the save, girl. I called out, and she held out in happiness at getting a chance to just run. Sorry, Kiba. I offered, and he growled out a grumble from around a burger that he was chewing angrily. He lost his match today. The enemy had hit him with a really surprising Mach-Amp, and it had just been too much for his poor Mitina to overcome. You did well. I offered, and he side-eyed me. No, really. Going against type advantage is hard, but you still hit that Mach-Amp. Trying to counter with Sucker Punch was a good call. It wasn't enough. He grumbled, and I nodded. It wasn't. Kiba was strong, but the trainer he fought had 3 years on him, and it showed. Kiba. Ivy called out as she rushed into the restaurant. She had her own battle after So hadn't been able to comfort Kiba. Ivy. You win? Yeah. She said a little embarrassed. Only barely. Venusaur got knocked out. I had to rely on Tauros, and then Clefairy. The match went long because the opponent used Eradicate, and it just couldn't hit with its Hyper Fang once Clefairy started hiding. Sneaky. I complimented her, and she smiled before growing. Sorry, Kiba. It's fine. Just. When one of you fight him, kick his ass for me. We will. I assured him with a fist raised to the sky. Us Viridian trainers have to represent. I called out, and Ivy just laughed at me, but didn't really confirm. Idiot. A new voice called out, and I turned with a smile. Zealous. Hi. Come join us. Pass. I heard you lost Kiba. She said while still standing beside the table. Yeah. He mumbled, grumbling a bit. It was funny, Kiba was hunched over his food, and the image made me think of a puppy grumbling around his food to keep anyone from touching it. Your opponent was good. Really good. I doubt most first-year trainers could have beaten him. She said, and then to my surprise she turned and walked to her own table farther into the restaurant. What the fuck does that mean? Kiba snapped, and I hummed. I think she was trying to comfort you actually. I offered, and Kiba blinked before scoffing, biting back into his cheeseburger with ravenous intent. While I was still staying in the free trainer's lodging, my family obviously wasn't. So once I had finished comforting Kiba, I had run off as Ivy had done the same to go find everyone. I was actually really thankful that I wasn't staying with them, because Papa and Uncle Leo close together was a recipe for awkward moments. Running through town, I hit the hotel that was actually pretty fancy, and headed up to the rooms our family had ordered. With both Elizabeth and I in the conference, our families each got a deal on rooms, but it had meant they were close by. I knocked and peeked my head inside only to relax. Papa was sitting at a cute little dining table with some food in front of him, while he was watching the TV. Papa. I called out as I rushed in, and I delighted in his smile brightening as he stood and scooped me into a hug. There she is. The girl of the hour. Is that Vicky I hear? Mama called out, and I laughed as she sat up from the bed where she had been completely hidden by pillows. We were just watching your tape. My what dash? No. I howled as I looked up and saw it. The Star Badge tape. It was playing the recordings of my gym battles. I reached for it to turn it off, but Papa had me held tight. Was it a trap all along? That's right. We're watching the whole thing, Mama said cheerfully, and I had to turn to her in horror at the betrayal. Graham is with Elizabeth next door, watching the normal tapes. To see the match Elizabeth got recorded, Papa added, and I slumped when I realized it was a family thing. They weren't going to let me turn it off. Plus, I really need to have a talk with a few gym leaders. That's Serge. Mama snapped, and I suddenly couldn't help but giggle, because Serge was in Trububble. I glanced up and saw that it was currently playing the Sabrina match, and I nodded because that wasn't going to last long. If you didn't like Serge, just wait until you see Blaine, I added. And Mama suddenly glared harder. I remember Vicky throwing lava around with a 10-year-old in the room. Mama hissed as she rose up and looked like she was going to strangle Blaine. Heh, yeah, I broke his stupid gym though, I said with a happy smile. He totally deserved it. Papa even patted my head a bit as he hugged me tight. Well, these matches are amazing trouble, Papa said, changing the topic. Looking up to the TV, Sabrina was losing fast, her Pokemon just not able to keep up without her crazy altering reality or perceptions while battling she had been doing before. I scoffed. They're okay. I'll be glad to not have to do the gym challenge again next year. Or any year for that matter, I said, and Papa laughed a deep rumble. Never again? Well, I mean, maybe if I go to another region or something? But not here again. I'll finally get to be lazy for a bit once the conference is over. Mama was suddenly there, and her fingers pinched my cheek. Lazy? AAA. Productive lazy, I countered, and she let me go. Good. No laziness, she proclaimed, and I just nodded hurriedly. The next morning, I woke up early and jumped onto Dragonite's back. I had gotten a call from a friend the night before. Flying into Johto only took a short time as I was already up in the mountains. And not long after I landed in sleepy Azalea Town. As I jumped off, I looked up at Dragonite and she gave me a look that I nodded at. She was ready for a battle today. It'll be your turn today, I told her, and she preed happily, her wings flapping and shifting her from battle-ready dragon to happy girl as she clapped her hands together. Vicky. Sorry I'm late. There was trouble with the Heracross this morning. One of them got into a fight, Bugsy explained as he ran up, panting. I noticed that despite the early morning, he looked like he had been up for a while. Heh. Bug nerd. Don't worry about it. I waved him off, and his shoulders relaxed at my words. I just got here anyways. You got everything? I do. Everyone is going to watch the forest for me while I'm at the conference. Cool. Come on, Dragonite needs a warm-up for her match today. Oh, she's going to fight today? She isn't going to, blow up the arena, is she? I don't know, I said happily as I climbed onto her back. Dragonite, you want to blow up the arena? I asked her, and she tilted her head like she was thinking about it, and I noticed Bugsy getting a little nervous before she couldn't hold it and started snickering, and I joined her, letting Bugsy realize we were messing with him. Funny, he said, but the smile on his lips kept it from biting. I've never been to the Indigo conference before. Is it any different than the Silver? I don't know. You'll have to tell me, I called out as Dragonite had, once Bugsy was on board, launched herself into the air at full speed. And this is Ivy. I introduced Bugsy as I finally found Ivy in a little cafe along the road eating breakfast. I smiled when I noticed a sleepy Fomantis sitting on the railing next to her, getting some early morning sun. Vicky? Oh, who is this? This is Bugsy, the Azalea gym leader, I introduced her, turning to Bugsy, who waved a little awkwardly, and I realized he was worried about girls being squeamish about bugs. Oh, how nice. I'm Ivy Vinewood. Viridian Bulbasaur breeders, along with some other grass types, she said a little formally, and Bugsy's eyes widened. Oh, that's wonderful. Bulbasaur are great assisted pollinators. Yes. Flowers are very important to grass types, and bug types too, I suppose. They are. Without so many grass types helping out, bug types wouldn't be able to pollinate as much, and so many bug types would suffer. Weedle and caterpillar both need lots of flowers in their diet. Bleg. But they always eat too many. Ivy instantly argued back, the irritated look of a girl that had done a lot of chores in her life across her face. Oh, that's a diet issue. If you plant some specific grasses around the flowers, they will only eat one or two before moving on. Wait, really? Yeah, flowers don't have all the nutrients they need, but they do have some key vitamins that they can't get from grass, but they'll overeat if there isn't enough grass in the area to draw them off. I felt like my neck was going back and forth, and Bugsy and Ivy started getting deep into gardening. I let out a breathy laugh so I didn't interrupt and just took a seat next to Fomantis, resting my head back against the railing next to them and enjoying the warm morning sun. It was cold outside after all. Ivy had her battle first today, so Bugsy and I were watching, and I was sort of excited. Bugs and grass types share a lot of similar battle strategies. Between poison and sleep effects and things. I was really hoping that Bugsy would get even more sneaky moves from Ivy, so our rematch would be even more fun. And the match was going to give him all that he needed, because it was getting a bit desperate. Ivy had gone into the fight serious, and had been pushed back right away by a ferocious type weakness. Azatu. The psychic flying type was perfect to counter Venusaur. Someone had studied his opponent and had a good counter. Especially since Ivy had jumped to try and use her normal sleep powder and the Azatu had magic bounce. Reflecting the status move right back at Venusaur. The shock on Ivy's face when her powder move had actually worked on her Venusaur had been obvious even up in the stands. I winced as Venusaur went flying from a powerful psychic, waking up the grass type for a moment, but as it rose up slowly and injured, it was obvious that Ivy's first move had failed. Venusaur. Return. Ivy called out, and I relaxed. Ivy always was good at noticing when it was too much. Go. She called out, and this time threw out her Butterfree. Interesting. I could feel Bugsy perk up, and suddenly as the battle continued, I watched Ivy continuously use a different battle style than she normally did. She was still using evade moves as often as she could. Substitute popped just then as Zata slammed into it with a nasty air slash. But a whirlwind blew up dust from the rock arena and hid Butterfree from view for a bit longer. Interesting. What were you up to, Ivy? Butterfree was losing. It simply wasn't keeping up with the Zata that was actually faster, as the bird kept boosting its own speed with Psychic literally throwing itself around the arena, but luckily it wasn't quite overcoming Ivy for one reason. As Zata used Psychic to throw a rock at Butterfree, I watched as the rock was deflected off with a Psychic as well. Heh. I didn't know Ivy had taught her Butterfree Psychic. Was it from a TM? Or practice? But it was working, as Zatu's trainer kept trying to finish it with Psychic and it kept failing just enough for Butterfree to succeed. Then I noticed it. The first rock that had been deflected away had been a struggle. As the battle went on, despite being on the back foot, it was less and less an arduous task. Ah. I see. Quiver dance? I questioned aloud, and Bugsy looked away for a second before nodding. Yep. The flutter Butterfree is doing when it dives after being discovered? That's quiver dance. It's bold. No one is noticing, because Butterfree is ducking down to hide after every use. I smirked at Bugsy's direct confirmation on what was happening. Of course the bug nerd would notice it right away. Then I think this battle was shifting in who was winning. But Butterfree couldn't keep this up. Substitute took some of the Pokemon's energy to make them. Each time they were created, that was a chunk of their health going away. Do it enough times and the Pokemon will just faint in exhaustion. Then it happened. Ivy must have been satisfied, and worried that she would push too far. Butterfree. Now. Baton pass. She called out, and I whistled. That was a move I hadn't expected. Especially since you weren't really supposed to return Pokemon in the conference. That might still count as them being out. Not that it mattered, I supposed. When Butterfree turned into energy and rushed back to Ivy, she held out a second Pokeball and the power washed over the ball before she tossed it out. What's this? A return and sending out a new Pokemon using Baton Pass. That counts, folks. Butterfree is out for this match, putting trainer Ivy Vinewood on the back foot. 2 down to nothing. Clef. Clefairy. The little pink ball cheered out as it landed, and I smirked as this battle might just be over. Ivy was a Kanto trainer too, after all. Moonblast. She called out and the trainer called out something, but it was too late. Quiver Dance increased special attack, special defense, and most importantly, speed. And Butterfree might have even maxed out its buffs. So the Zata made to move, its energy glowed as Psychic was activated, its trainer telling it to block it, but it was too late. The energy ball appeared between Clefairy's hands, and then a moment later the air shrieked as a beam of energy rocketed out, and blasted into the bird. Heh. I couldn't help but laugh at just how much power Ivy had released. She had gone a bit overkill with that one. She could have done that earlier, but nope. She decided to go all out. Whoa. Bugsy whispered beside me, and I nodded as the crowd around us roared in excitement. It was time for the Ivy sweep. The battle was over at that point, but the trainer still tried to resist. Only when her Charizard slammed into the earth, unable to resist the overwhelming power of the tiny pink terror that Ivy had brought to bear, did the match get called. Hee hee. Ivy really was a Kanto trainer at heart. Going for the overwhelming power play. A note from Seras. Thank you for reading. I'm almost done with all the prep for a new release that I hope everyone will really enjoy. It's going to be a space opera about exploring the far distant future's humanity and spaceships. Phantom Star is really close to being released. And I hope you'll give it a try.